A boy once stared at the stars and asked his master a question no Jedi should ever ask. If the Force is balance, why do we pretend only one side is truth? No one answered him. This is the story of Exar Kun, the Dark Lord who chose knowledge over peace. Before the temples of Yavin 4 were stained in fire, before the galaxy knew his name, Exar was a child of promise. He walked the halls of the Jedi Temple not with innocence, but with calculation. He learned faster than the others, memorized entire volumes of galactic history without speaking. When other students meditated, he listened not to the Force, but to the silence behind it. And in that silence, something waited. He had been brought to the Order at a young age like most. The records do not name his homeworld with certainty, but to him, that place was never home. The Jedi were. Their rituals, their lessons, their endless need for obedience. It was a quiet prison that looked like a sanctuary. Exar never defied the rules, not then. He followed them to perfection. In lightsaber training, he advanced faster than anyone in his generation. His mind was sharp, his instincts sharper. And his desire to impress the masters burned like a second sun behind his eyes. But it wasn't enough to know what the Jedi taught. He wanted to know why they chose to teach only pieces of the truth. He began to ask questions, dangerous ones. Why the Order kept forbidden texts sealed. Why some temples were left in ruins and never rebuilt. Why history had gaps entire centuries unspoken. His instructors called him curious, then arrogant, then warned him to stop. He didn't. In the quiet hours after lightsaber drills, he walked the old corridors, not to reflect, but to listen. There were rooms, even in the core temple on Coruscant, where the air seemed to bend with age. Where the Force felt heavier. It called to him in a way the masters never did. One evening, as his peers meditated in silence, Exar opened a door he wasn't supposed to find. Inside was a forgotten archive, dusty and dim. No security, no guards. Just a single holocron, ancient and humming with the faint blue light of memory. He didn't open it. Not yet. He only watched it. And it watched him back. By the time he was chosen as Padawan to master Vodo Siosk Bars, Exar Kun had already made his decision. He would become the greatest Jedi of his age. But he would not become what they wanted. He did not want peace. He wanted understanding. He did not seek harmony. He sought truth no matter how deep it was buried. And already that truth had begun to whisper to him. Vodo Siosk Bars was wise, a respected Jedi of the old ways. He saw the power in his apprentice, the potential, and the danger. But it was too late to refuse him. The Council had made their choice. And the Order needed heroes more than it feared ambition. Exar smiled the day he left the temple. Not because he was free, but because he knew the road ahead would not be lit by Jedi wisdom. It would be carved by his own hand. Master Vodo Siosk Bars was not like the other Jedi. He was old, not just in body but in spirit. He had lived through battles most young knights only studied. He had walked among ghosts of fallen orders, and he understood something the Council rarely spoke aloud. That power always came at a price. Exar Kun was his greatest student, and his most dangerous. Their bond began in silence. Vodo watched. Exar obeyed. Their lightsaber training was a rhythm of perfection. Vodo's quarterstaff against Exar's blade. Each strike deliberate, each parry calculated. Exar was brilliant, sharper than steel, faster than thought. But beneath his flawless technique, Vodo sensed a hunger. It did not move like anger. It was colder than that, quieter, a need to know everything, to command the Force, not serve it. Exar called it curiosity. Vodo called it pride. They traveled far in those early years, to ruined enclaves on Renvar, to forgotten monoliths on Ossus, to the deep forests of Dantooine, where silence stretched for miles. Vodo tried to guide him with patience, offering lessons through riddles and experience, not orders, never punishment. But Exar was not a child to be tamed. He absorbed every lesson, mastered every form, and when the teaching stopped, he kept digging. In the archives, he unearthed texts about the 100-year darkness. He memorized names the Jedi no longer said aloud. Ajunta Pol, Soshan, Sorza Sin. These were not Sith Lords to him. They were questions the Order refused to answer. One night, around the coals of a dying fire on Onderon, he asked the question again. Why did the Jedi destroy knowledge instead of protecting it? Vodo did not speak for a long time. Then he said only this. Some truths lead to silence, and some silence is death. Exar looked away. He knew the stories of the Dark Jedi exiles. He had studied the Mandalorian border wars. He had read the warnings carved into the stones of Malachor. But to him, history was not a warning. It was a challenge. Every ruin he stepped through whispered the same promise. There is more. They returned to Dantooine that season. The Order had summoned Vodo to teach a new class of Padawans. Exar obeyed, standing as a silent assistant beside his master. He said little. He corrected technique. But his eyes wandered. He watched how the Jedi spoke of light with certainty, as if no other path had ever existed. How they brushed past questions of war. How they sealed the holocrons that didn't align with the code. And he saw fear. Not in the students, but in the teachers. Fear of history. Fear of curiosity. Fear of the dark. Exar began to train alone at night, refining combat forms that no longer matched standard instruction. He blended Niman and Juio, read fragments of ancient Makashi, reconstructed movements from Jedi battle scrolls long since abandoned. He was no longer learning. He was rebuilding. Vodo noticed the shift. In his footwork, in his silence, in his refusal to discuss the Force. One evening, the master asked his student a final question. Do you still trust the Jedi way? Exar Kun did not lie. I trust the Force, not the way others interpret it. Vodo said nothing more. And in that silence, something between them cracked. Not a break, not yet, but the first fracture in a bond that would not survive what came next. Exar Kun was no longer becoming a Jedi. He was becoming something else. Exar Kun was changing, and the Jedi could feel it long before he spoke a word. The shift wasn't loud. It didn't arrive in anger or defiance. It appeared in smaller places, in the way he walked past the archives without waiting for permission, in the way he questioned ancient teachings as though they were merely suggestions, not truths carved over millennia. He had begun searching for something the Jedi did not want him to find. And they knew it. The Order taught that the Sith were gone, extinct, a legend buried under scarred worlds and forgotten tombs. But Exar found fragments that didn't support that story. A broken tablet on Ossus with inscriptions the archivists pretended not to see. A sealed holocron in the restricted wing, trembling faintly when he passed. Even his master hesitated when he asked about the old wars. The Jedi were hiding something. At first, Exar told himself it was for protection, the Council shielding younger minds from the corrupting pull of ancient darkness. But the more he studied, the more he realized the silence wasn't caution. It was fear. The turning point came in a quiet library on Dantooine. Exar had been assigned simple research cross-referencing star maps for newly discovered hyperspace routes. Instead, he followed a whisper of curiosity down a forgotten aisle lined with dust-covered manuscripts. He found a scroll sealed in red wax, older than the Republic's own calendar system. When he touched it, the Force shivered. Inside were records of the First Great Schism, of Jedi who had broken away not out of hatred, but out of conviction. They had believed the Force was larger than the restrictions the Council placed upon it. They had believed knowledge should not be caged. They had believed power was not the enemy, only the heart that wielded it. Exar read every line, and for the first time, he saw a reflection of himself, not in the Jedi, but in those who walked away from them. He hid the scroll in his robes, but the archivist sensed the disturbance. Later that night, Exar was summoned to speak before a Jedi master he had never met. The conversation was polite, calm, almost gentle, but beneath the softness there was a warning. Some knowledge is forbidden for a reason, the elder told him. Curiosity is not a sin, but obsession can become one. Exar bowed, said nothing, and left. But inside him, something hardened. For days afterward, he felt the Council's eyes on him, whispered discussions as he passed, subtle questions about his studies. Vodo Sioskbars tried to intervene with patience, guiding him back towards safer paths. But Exar had already begun to view the Order not as guardians, but as gatekeepers. They taught the light, yet hid the darkness. They preached peace, yet erased history built on war. They warned against forbidden power, yet refused to explain why. The Force, Exar believed, was not divided. Only the Jedi were. One evening, while Vodo met with the Council, Exar returned to the restricted archives. He didn't break in. He didn't need to. The door opened the moment he touched it, not by clearance, but by resonance. Something inside recognized him or wanted him to recognize it. There, resting on a pedestal of polished obsidian, was an ancient Jedi holocron. Its surface glowed faintly, a soft blue pulse like a heartbeat beneath glass. It contained records from the era of the Dark Lords, knowledge sealed for generations. Exar stood before it for a long time. The room felt cold. The Force seemed to bend around him, waiting. He reached out his hand, and the holocron opened for him when it had refused countless others. In that moment, the Jedi's fears became his truth. They weren't protecting him from darkness. They were protecting themselves from what he might become. The holocron's light faded slowly, leaving the room in a silence that felt almost alive. Exar Kun stood motionless, the echoes of forgotten voices settling inside him like dust. What he had learned was not complete. The holocron showed fragments, pieces of battles, teachings, betrayals, and truths that the Jedi had carved out of history. But even incomplete, it was enough to change him. Enough to show him that the Jedi had lied. He left the restricted archives long after the temple had gone quiet, walking through the moonlit halls with the weight of a new purpose pressing against his chest. The secrets he carried weren't just dangerous. They were forbidden, and he held them with the calm of someone who believed he had finally taken his first step toward something greater than the order that raised him. But even then, even in that early stage of his fall, a part of him still waited for the Jedi to offer an answer that would stop him. They never did. In the following days, Exar trained harder, moved faster, questioned deeper. His lightsaber drills gained a sharpness that startled other students. His meditations grew darker, shaped by visions that weren't entirely his own. He saw ruins lit by red fire, statues buried under centuries of sand. A figure formed of smoke and memory, calling to him from beyond the edge of the known galaxy. He never told Vodo Siosk Baz what he saw. But the old Jedi felt the change. One afternoon, as the twin sons of Dantooine dipped low, Vodo confronted him with quiet sorrow instead of anger. His tone wasn't stern. It wasn't accusing. It was the voice of a master who already knew he had failed. "Exar, what have you opened?" The question pierced deeper than any reprimand. Exar hesitated, for a moment allowing the fear beneath his ambition to surface. He could have confessed then. He could have reached out for guidance. But pride sealed his silence. "It was nothing," he said. And the lie was too smooth to sound accidental. Vodo lowered his head. That night, the Force itself seemed to hold its breath. Exar returned to the Forgotten Isle in the archives, the place where the first forbidden scroll had called to him. He walked more confidently now, guided not by curiosity, but by destiny. Or at least what he believed destiny should feel like. The holocron had shown him enough to understand that power came to those who sought it, not those who waited. Behind the dusty shelves, in a dark alcove carved centuries earlier, he found another relic, a small pyramid-shaped object coated in age and shadows. When he lifted it, the temperature in the room dropped. He didn't know its name then, but he felt its hunger. A Sith holocron. Silent, patient, a wound preserved through time. He didn't open this one. He couldn't. It resisted him, its secrets coiled tightly like a sleeping beast. But even dormant, it whispered in the cracks of his mind. It showed him flashes of ancient temples, of crimson skies, of Jedi who broke themselves chasing answers about the very darkness he now held in his hand. When Exar finally returned to his quarters, he hid the holocron beneath his robes. He did not sleep that night. He sat in the faint glow of starlight, staring at the object as if waiting for it to breathe. In the silence, a simple truth formed inside him. If the Jedi feared this knowledge, then he was meant to uncover it. If the Council locked it away, then he was meant to open it. If the Force itself tried to warn him, then he would walk toward the warning instead of turning away. The fall of Exar Kun didn't begin with hatred. It began with silence. The silence of masters who would not answer. The silence of history the Jedi tried to erase. The silence inside him that slowly filled with shadows. And soon, those shadows would answer him back. There were no stars above Yavin 4. Only clouds thick, unmoving, pressed like smoke against a jungle that never slept. Exar Kun stepped from his shuttle and took his first breath of the humid air. It felt like ash wrapped in heat. The trees were enormous. Roots as wide as freighters, vines like muscle pulled tight over ancient stone. The world was not dead, but it was not alive in the way most planets were. It pulsed. The Force here was different, heavy and slow, like it had been buried too long and now remembered pain. His boots sank into moss. The wind spoke in strange tones, and every step felt like a trespass. He had come alone, not out of necessity, but because no Jedi would follow him here. Yavin 4 was not on any standard charts. He found it through fragments, scraps of Sith history, symbols buried in temple ruins, whispers pulled from the holocron he had hidden from Master Vodo. It had taken months to trace the coordinates, but the name came up again and again, always tied to one figure. Breeden Nad. Exar knew the stories. Nad had been a Jedi once. Brilliant, restless, obsessed with forbidden knowledge. But the records ended with his exile. What came after was vague, only rumors of a tomb, of a cult, of power hidden beneath the jungle. The Order had written him off as a madman who vanished into myth. But Exar wanted the part they had erased. He pressed deeper into the forest. The light faded quickly, though the sun had not yet set. The canopy above was too thick. Soon he walked in shadows, lit only by the pale blue flicker of his lightsaber. Not drawn, but held close just in case. He passed trees twisted into shapes that no storm could explain. Broken statues half swallowed by roots. A stone obelisk, cracked down the middle, still humming faintly with residual energy. No animals, no birds, nothing moved. Except him. Hours passed. Then he saw it. Rising out of the jungle floor, a ziggurat of black stone, wide, angular, scarred with the marks of time. One of the ancient Sith temples. Its steps were steep, the edges worn smooth by centuries of rain and heat. But the feeling that hit him as he approached wasn't awe. It was something colder. Recognition. As if the temple had been waiting. He climbed slowly, one hand brushing the stone for balance. Halfway up, he paused. The air thinned, his skin tightened. The force curled around him like smoke. This was not darkness in the way Jedi described it. It was older, less about anger, and more about memory. Echoes of pain trapped in the walls, sorrow soaked into the stone. When he reached the summit, the jungle stretched endlessly in every direction, green, red, and gold beneath the mist. There was no sound, no wind. Only the quiet breath of a world too wounded to speak. And then he felt it. Not a sound, not a vision, a pressure in the back of his mind. A presence. Something had noticed him. Exar dropped to one knee, breathing slow, centering himself. The pull of the place was subtle but growing stronger. Like something beneath the temple was waking up. He did not run. He didn't leave. He closed his eyes. He had come here seeking knowledge, but now knowledge was seeking him. And what it found would change the galaxy forever. The presence did not come with footsteps. It came with a silence so deep that even the wind seemed to hide from it. Exar Kun stood at the top of the ancient ziggurat, breathing slowly, letting his senses widen into the darkness beneath the stones. The air thickened around him. The force shifted, turning cold, then warm, then cold again, like something was testing his resolve. And then it spoke. Not aloud, not in a voice shaped by lungs or breath. It spoke through the weight of the air, through the tremble of the stones, through the echo of a memory that was not his. Jedi. The word slid into his mind like a blade wrapped in velvet. Exar's eyes opened. He did not draw his weapon. Something told him a lightsaber meant nothing here. He looked around, searching the mist, the shadows, the broken stairway leading back into the depths of the temple. But there was no one. Only the presence. "You have come far to find what your masters fear," it whispered. "But you are still blind." Exar swallowed, steadying his breathing. "Show yourself." Laughter, soft, ancient, almost amused, drifted through him like a cold wind. Shadows tightened around the edges of the platform. Light dimmed. The jungle below seemed to shrink, retreating into silence as if it feared what was coming. And then he saw it. A shape forming in the air before him, faint at first, then growing clearer, a tall figure clad in layered armor, robes hanging like torn smoke, eyes burning with an unnatural violet light. His outline flickered, sometimes whole, sometimes fractured, like a memory refusing to settle into form. Freedom Nad. Not a ghost, not just a spirit. A will that refused to die. Exar did not step back. His heart pounded, but he held his ground. He had read about Sith illusions, ancient sorcery, the power of dead lords who clung to the world through hatred alone. Yet seeing one with his own eyes felt different, heavier, more real. "You should not be here," Exar said quietly. "Your story ended centuries ago." The spirit's smile was slow and knowing. Stories end, power does not. The sky darkened further as Nad circled him, moving without sound or weight. "I have watched the Jedi bury my name. They fear what I learned, what I became." The air thickened with every word. "And now, they fear you." Exar felt something twist in his chest. He had never admitted that truth aloud. But hearing it spoken by the darkness itself felt like a revelation. "I seek knowledge," he said. "Nothing more." The spirit stopped, its burning eyes sharpened. "Knowledge is the first lie the Jedi teach." Exar tensed, unsure if it was accusation or invitation. Nad drifted closer, his voice turning colder. "You crave power, the power they denied you, the power they fear, the power to shape the Force instead of kneeling before it." For a long moment, Exar said nothing. Because he could not deny it. The spirit extended a hand or the echo of one. "Ask, and I will show you what lies beyond the blindness of the Jedi." Exar felt the pull heavy, intoxicating, dangerous. It pressed against him like a storm, waiting for permission to break. But he did not reach out. Instead, he whispered, "What will it cost?" The jungle seemed to exhale. Clouds churned overhead. The ground trembled faintly beneath them. Freedom Nad's answer was soft. "Only what you were never meant to keep." A chill crawled up Exar's spine. His soul. His silence. His future. It was the first true offer of power he had ever received, honest, terrible, and undeniable. And here, on a forgotten moon where no Jedi would ever come to save him, the darkness waited for his answer. Exar Kun did not accept the offer. Not yet. He stood at the edge of the ancient platform, staring through the spirit of Freedom Nad as if looking for truth behind smoke. Something inside him resisted not loyalty, not fear, but a quiet instinct shaped by Master Vodo's lessons. Power offered freely was never free. Nad sensed the hesitation. The spirit's expression shifted. The violet glow in his eyes dimmed, as if patience itself were beginning to crack. "You cling to the Jedi still," Nad murmured. "You cling to their chains." Exar tightened his jaw. "I follow my own path." The words were steady, but the jungle reacted as if he had spoken a challenge. Thunder rolled somewhere deep within the clouds. The wind began to rise, swirling around the ziggurat in a tightening spiral that carried heat, dust, and the scent of something ancient returning to life. Freedom Nad's form flickered, growing sharper. Then, "Prove it." The ground shook. A deep, rumbling growl echoed from the steps below. Exar turned sharply, hand moving toward his lightsaber. The shadows at the base of the temple shifted not with darkness, but with movement. Massive forms stepped into the fading light. Masasi. Not the warriors of old, but their descendants, twisted, red-skinned beings shaped by Sith alchemy generations ago. Their bodies were thick with muscle, their faces carved with bone ridges, their eyes burning with a bestial intelligence. There were 3, then 6, then more. Exar ignited his lightsaber with a single breath. Blue light cut through the gloom. Freedom Nad drifted behind him, silent now, watching. The first Massassi charged, its footsteps cracked stone. Exar stepped aside and swung in a tight arc, slicing through its arm and chest. The creature fell, but two more were already climbing the steps, claws dragging furrows into the ancient rock. Exar moved faster. His blade carved through the air one smooth strike, then another. He was a blur of precision and instinct, every lesson from Vodo guiding his steps. But these warriors did not fall easily. Their skin was thick, their pain drowned by the will of the long-dead Sith Lord who bound them to this place. A claw raked across Exar's shoulder. Pain exploded through him. He stumbled, but did not fall. The creature lunged again, jaws wide, and Exar drove his blade upward into its throat. It collapsed, shaking the ground. Another leapt from behind, slamming into him with the force of a battering ram. Exar hit the stone floor hard, breath leaving his lungs in a sharp gasp. His saber rolled away, spinning toward the edge of the platform. For the first time since he set foot on Yavin 4, fear entered him. Not of death, but of losing control. The Massassi clawed at him, teeth snapping inches from his face. Exar summoned the force in a violent burst, sending the creature flying backward with a bone-cracking thud. He crawled toward his lightsaber, fingers brushing the hilt just as another Massassi lunged. Too slow. A massive hand closed around his arm, lifting him off the ground. Pain shot through his shoulder. The warrior roared into his face, breath hot and rancid. Freedom Nad whispered, "Accept my gift and live." Exar gritted his teeth, refusing. "Then die." The Massassi's claws tightened. Exar's vision blurred. The jungle roared. The darkness pressed closer, curling around his mind like a hand closing over his skull. He reached deeper into the Force, deeper than he ever had, past training, past fear, past the limits the Jedi had placed around him. Something hot flooded through him, like liquid fire spreading through his veins. His body shook, his eyes burned, and with a scream that wasn't entirely his own, he unleashed a shockwave of raw energy. The Massassi flew apart. Exar collapsed to his knees, breath ragged, skin trembling with the aftershock of power he didn't understand. Freedom Nad drifted close, smiling. "You see," the spirit whispered, "the Jedi never taught you this." Blood dripped from Exar's arm. The stone beneath him was cracked, and for the first time in his life, he felt the edge of something he could not turn away from. Power. Real power. Drawn from fear, pain, and will. Flesh had broken, bone had been tested, and the fire inside him had finally begun to burn. Exar Kun lay on the stone platform, the jungle spinning slowly above him. His breath came in uneven waves. His body trembled from the shock wave. He had unleashed a burst of raw power that felt nothing like the force he had been taught to control. It was wilder, hotter, more alive, and it terrified him. His lightsaber flickered weakly beside him. The blue glow reflected off the broken bodies of the Massassi scattered across the summit. Their blood seeped into the cracks of the ancient stone, dark and thick. The air grew still, as if even the jungle did not dare speak after what it had witnessed. Freedom Nad's spirit hovered at the edge of the platform, waiting. "You tasted it," the whisper said. "The power the Jedi denied you." Exar forced himself to sit up. Pain lanced through his shoulder. His hands shook as he pulled his lightsaber closer, holding the weapon like an anchor in a world that was quickly losing shape. "I didn't ask for that power," he said. Nad's smile deepened, but it answered you. The sky above was darkening, though night had not yet fallen. Thick clouds gathered in a spiral overhead, drawn by the same energy that had erupted from Exar's mind and body. The jungle responded, two vines curling inward, leaves trembling, small creatures fleeing into deeper shadows. The entire moon felt alive, and it felt focused on him. Exar pushed himself to his feet, swaying slightly. This place, it changes everything. The spirit drifted closer, movements slow and deliberate. Yavin reveals what the Jedi hide. It strips away their lies. Here, the Force is free, and so are you. Exar turned away, pacing toward the edge of the platform. He stared into the endless canopy, a sea of green stretching beyond the fog. His heart hammered in his chest, not from fear but from the truth he had tried to ignore. He had survived an attack that should have killed him. He had summoned power beyond anything Vodo ever taught. And it felt natural, as if it had always belonged to him. But he also felt something else. A fracture. A break inside him, small but real, widening with every breath he took on this cursed moon. Exar closed his eyes. "What do you want from me, Nad?" The spirit's whisper curled around him like smoke. "To finish what I began. To shape you into the one who will succeed where I failed. The Jedi cannot guide you anymore. Their fear has blinded them." Exar's voice dropped to a whisper. "And you would guide me." For the first time, Nad's face hardened not with anger, but with certainty. "I would make you powerful." The words hit Exar like a blade to the chest. Not wise, not peaceful, not balanced. Powerful, the one promise the Jedi never offered him. Exar felt the choice forming in the space between his heartbeats. Power came with a price, he knew that. But here, surrounded by ancient stone and the ghosts of a forgotten army, he understood something the Order never taught. Some destinies did not wait to be chosen. They pulled. They demanded. They claimed. Lightning flickered far above, illuminating the temple in a pale blue flash. Exar looked up, eyes burning with a mixture of exhaustion and awakening. He whispered, "If I walk this path, I walk it alone." Freedom Nad drifted nearer, the faint glow of his form reflecting off Exar's wounded arm. "No, Exar Kun," he said softly. "You walk it with the power the Jedi feared to touch." A final tremor ran through the platform. Something deep within the temple stirred a presence older than history, sensing the moment a Jedi's fate cracked open like a wound. Exar Kun stood there, wounded, shaking, and silent. And in that silence, a Jedi broke. Not loudly, not violently, but in the quiet acceptance of a truth he could no longer deny. The path ahead was dark, and he was already taking his first steps into it. Korriban did not welcome him. It watched him. As Exar Kun stepped onto the red sands, the wind fell silent, like the planet had stopped breathing. No birds, no movement. Just rock and dust, and the endless weight of eyes that had long since turned to bone. This was not a place of life. It was a world of memory. A graveyard so old that the Force itself moved slower here. He walked slowly across the dunes, robes trailing behind him, boots pressing into sand that had swallowed thousands of warriors before him. The sky above was dim and colorless. The air tasted of rust. But it wasn't the weather that made Korriban feel cold. It was the presence of pressure in his chest, in his bones, like being watched by ghosts too proud to stay buried. These were not Jedi dead. These were Sith. Exar followed the broken trail toward a mountain ridge, where the tombs waited carved into the cliffs like wounds left open to bleed history. Massive stone doors stood crooked from time, flanked by statues with hollow eyes and mouths that screamed in silence. Their names were gone, but their power wasn't. It lingered. Freedon Nad had told him this was where his journey would continue. But Nad was silent now. Exar had not heard the spirit since Yavin, not even in dreams. The connection had faded not because it was broken, but because it was finished. The last lesson, whatever it was, lay here. Not in a vision, not in a whisper, but in the ground itself. He stepped into the first tomb. The light dimmed behind him. The stone walls closed in. The deeper he walked, the quieter everything became. Not with peace, but with pressure. As if the tomb was holding its breath, his hand brushed the carvings along the walls, glyphs etched in a forgotten tongue, stained black by centuries of blood and decay. He did not need to read them to understand. Pain, power, betrayal, ascension, the story of every Sith. It was not a code, it was a pattern, a spiral, always turning, always repeating. Exar moved deeper. He passed burial chambers cracked open from within, sarcophagi split by unseen hands. Bones lay scattered like offerings, weapons rusted into the floor, robes turned to dust. But the darkness in the Force was not weaker here. It was stronger, alive, waiting. He lit a torch and descended into a final hall, one not marked by any name, just a single phrase carved in high Sith across the arch. Only he who is already broken may walk forward. He paused. His mind flickered back to Dantooine, to Master Vodo, to the blue blade he once carried in quiet service, the silence of the archives, the teachings he once believed. Then he stepped forward, and the floor gave way. He fell. Not far, but far enough. Dust exploded around him. He landed hard on stone. When the dust cleared, he was in a small chamber lit by dim red crystals embedded in the walls. At the center stood a pedestal, and atop it, a mask. It was simple, metal, worn smooth. But the moment he looked at it, the Force pulled tight. It wasn't an object. It was a memory. Not his. Someone else's. He stepped closer, and as his hand hovered above it, the air shifted. A whisper stirred, not in his ears but in his chest. "What are you?" The tomb was asking. The Force was listening. And the dead were beginning to speak. The chamber was small. Bare walls, quiet air. No doors but the one he fell through, now sealed by stone and time. Exar Kun stood before the mask, heart slowing, breath caught in his throat. It didn't move, it didn't glow, but something about it felt alive. Not like an artifact, but like a threshold, a test. The Force around him grew still. Then, it shifted. The red crystals dimmed. The floor beneath his feet cracked just slightly, and the shadows deepened not around him, but within him. And that was when it began. He didn't fall asleep. He didn't close his eyes. But in an instant, the chamber was gone. He stood now in a wide field beneath a dark sky, the stars churning like smoke. The ground was scorched. Bodies lay strewn in every direction. Jedi and Sith, all faceless, all broken. Lightsabers hissed out, their colors flickering like dying embers. He wasn't sure if this was the past, or something worse. From across the battlefield, a figure approached. No face, no name, but he moved with purpose, and with a voice that echoed through the marrow of Exar's bones. "You do not understand power." Exar raised his weapon, but there was nothing in his hand. The figure walked closer. You seek control, but you cannot control what you fear to claim. Exar tried to speak, but no sound came. The field shifted again. Now he stood in the Jedi temple. He was a student again, a child. Master Vodo stood before him, disappointment in his eyes. "Why must you question everything?" the voice asked. "Because I needed answers," Exar tried to say. But the vision moved on. Now he stood above Ossus, watching Jedi archives burn, pages turning to ash, scrolls vanishing in fire, hands clawing from beneath the rubble. It was not happening, it would happen. A future or a warning, maybe both. The mask appeared again, floating in the smoke, watching him. "You wanted knowledge," the voice whispered, "not as a spirit, but as something deeper. Now take it." Exar reached toward the mask, but the sky cracked. A bolt of red lightning split the horizon, and a scream tore through the stars. He fell again backward, into darkness, through space and memory and light, until suddenly he was back in the chamber. On his knees, sweating, bleeding from his palms, but alive. The mask still sat on the pedestal, untouched. But now it was open, split down the center, revealing a small black crystal suspended inside. He approached it slowly. This was not a Sith holocron. It was older. It had no name. But as he touched it, images rushed through him. A Junta Pol kneeling before his blade. Tulak Horde carving truth into stone. Sorza Sin bleeding her saber beneath a dead sky. Hundreds of years. Thousands of screams. One story, told in endless forms. The Jedi break. The Sith endure. Exar stepped back. He had not spoken a word, but the tomb had given him its answer. He was no longer a visitor. No longer a student. He had been weighed, judged, scarred, and accepted. As he stood in the flickering light of the chamber, the air thinned again. His legs trembled. The force no longer flowed around him, it coiled. And he understood. The tomb was not here to destroy him. It was here to prepare him. The visions weren't warnings. They were instructions, not lessons carved in stone, but in him. And he had passed. The chamber did not stay silent. As Exar steadied himself, the air shifted again, colder now, as if something old had returned to breathe down his neck. Dust lifted from the floor, the red crystals dimmed, and the shadows along the far wall stretched into a long, thin shape. He knew the presence before it fully formed. Freedon Nad. The spirit emerged slowly, like smoke rising from a dying ember. His outline wavered, flickering between the man he once was and the echo he had become. Exar's pulse tightened. He had come to Korriban expecting secrets, illusions, maybe trials. He had not expected Nad to follow him here. The spirit drifted closer, expression unreadable. "You survived the tomb," Nad whispered. "Good. Few ever do." Exar wiped the blood from his palms. "You said nothing would follow me. You said Yavin was the end of your guidance." Freedon Nad's smile curled, faint and cold. "I said I had taught you what you needed, not that I was finished with you." The chamber trembled faintly, as if reacting to the spirit's presence. Exar took a step back, not out of fear, but out of caution. Nad had guided him before, but always with purpose. Always toward something darker than he admitted. This visit felt different. More desperate. Exar narrowed his eyes. "What do you want?" The spirit didn't answer at first. Instead, he drifted toward the pedestal where the mask lay open. His translucent hand hovered above the black crystal, inside the same crystal that had ripped visions through Exar's mind only moments earlier. The air thickened. Nad's voice deepened. "Korriban has accepted you, but it has not yet crowned you." The statement echoed through Exar's chest like a heartbeat. Crowned, chosen, named. Words he had never heard from a Jedi. Words he had never been offered by anyone who feared the truth of what he could become. But here, surrounded by the dead, the idea felt right. "Why me?" he asked quietly. Nad's eyes burned brighter. "Because you broke before the Jedi could bind you. Because your hunger is stronger than their teachings. Because you fear nothing more than limits." Exar's throat tightened. The spirit leaned closer. "And because the Sith do not choose the weak." Exar felt something shift inside him, not a break, not a collapse, but an alignment, a recognition of a truth he had carried since childhood, buried beneath years of discipline and denial. He had never feared darkness. He had feared being trapped. Nad moved around him, circling like a predator studying prey. "There is a ritual," the spirit whispered. "An ancient rite performed by the greatest lords before you. Only one who survives the trials of Korriban may take it, and only one with your strength may complete it." Exar hesitated. "What does it require?" Nad's expression did not change. "Your surrender." A cold weight settled in Exar's stomach. "My surrender to you." The spirit laughed, a hollow sound that echoed unnaturally against the stone. "No, not to me. To the truth you were born to claim." The chamber dimmed further. Shadows wrapped around Nad's figure. The force trembled, rippling across the floor in tiny currents that lifted dust into the air. The ritual was revealing itself. Not through words, through intent. He understood. This was the final tether, the last test between who he had been and who he would become. The Jedi inside him, wounded, fractured, clinging to a past already buried, would not survive this. Exar drew a breath. "What must I do?" Nad's eyes softened, but not with kindness. "You must fall, so you can rise." The chamber pulsed. The shadows deepened. And the spirit of Freedom, Nad, the teacher who refused to die, extended his final invitation. The ritual began without a word. No chant, no circle, no fire, just silence. Exar Kun stood alone in the lowest chamber of the tomb, a space untouched by wind or time. The walls were smooth. The floor was bare. Even the force here felt thin, like a breath held too long. And yet, it was in this emptiness that his identity would die. And something else would rise. Freedom, Nad's spirit no longer hovered near. He was gone, not banished, but spent, his purpose fulfilled. All that remained was Exar, and the weight of what he was about to do. In the center of the room sat a stone basin filled with dark liquid. It was thick, unmoving, reflective like obsidian. He stepped toward it slowly, each movement guided more by instinct than by knowledge. The force pulsed once low and deep, like a drum echoing from beneath the stone. He looked down into the black pool, and the surface began to shift. Not water, not fire, something between. Shapes moved within it, faces, moments, memories. Not his own. Lords who had come before. Lords who had died here. Lords who had left behind pieces of their essence, fused into this place through blood and will. They looked at him, waiting, testing, and then, from the basin, a single ripple spread outward and rose. A column of shadow lifted from the center, spiraling upward into the shape of a crown. Not metal, not real, a vision shaped by the Force. But it pressed against his chest like gravity. Exar closed his eyes and stepped forward. The shadow crown descended slowly, passing through him like smoke, but where it touched, it burned. Not the skin, the soul. He clenched his fists, gritted his teeth, tried not to scream. But inside, something tore. The last tether to who he had been, the apprentice, the prodigy, the Jedi who once believed in truth. Gone. He dropped to his knees. Not in surrender, in transformation. The pain faded, and silence returned. But this time it was not empty. It was full of power, of presence, of something ancient now wrapped around his spine like armor. He stood. The chamber did not brighten, the Force did not sing, but he felt it a shift. The walls seemed to lean back, the air parted. Even the dead, wherever they were, seemed to watch more carefully now. He walked back through the halls of the tomb. The spirits did not appear again. No more trials, no more illusions, only stillness. He passed the mask on its pedestal. He did not take it. He no longer needed a symbol to know who he was. When he emerged from the tomb, the skies above Korriban had changed. Clouds roiled in slow, spiraling patterns. Lightning blinked in the distance, but no thunder followed. The sand felt firmer beneath his feet. The wind no longer hid. It whispered. Dark Lord, not spoken, not declared, but known. He stood at the edge of the cliff, watching the storm crawl across the horizon. He was not Jedi. He was not Sith, as the Order once defined it. He was something sharpened by both, forged in the silence of the jungle, crowned in the graves of history. Freedom Nad was gone, and Exar Kun now stood alone. But the galaxy would not stay silent forever. War would come. And when it did, the Jedi would learn what the darkness had already accepted. That power does not beg. It claims. And the one who walks through death without flinching does not serve the Sith. He becomes the Sith. Sinagar burned beneath a blood-colored sky. The capital of the Empress Teta system was once a jewel of trade and industry, shining towers, cultural pride, ancient tradition. Now it was a battlefield. The streets cracked under the weight of war machines. Smoke twisted upward from shattered temples, and in the heart of it all, two men approached each other across a sea of flame and silence. Exar Kun did not come to conquer. Ulic Qel-Droma had already done that. The fallen Jedi stood at the center of the palace courtyard, surrounded by armored Krath soldiers and fading echoes of resistance. His face was calm, but his eyes, once bright with conviction, were shadowed now by something deeper. Not rage, not guilt. Something colder. Exar stepped forward, cloak trailing in the ash. His presence in the Force was sharp, dark, newly forged. The city felt it. So did Ulic. They had never met, but they already knew each other. Both had been trained by the Jedi. Both had broken from the code. Both had tasted power and pain. They were not enemies, not yet, but the Force between them pulsed with tension, as if the galaxy itself was holding its breath. Ulic drew his lightsaber first. Exar didn't hesitate. Their blades ignited red and blue, and the courtyard exploded with light. There were no words, no challenge, just motion. Exar moved like a storm, his strikes precise, filled with the fury of transformation. Ulic countered with brutal control, each block laced with years of loss, the death of his brother, the betrayal of the Order, the war tearing at his soul. They circled each other through smoke and dust, blades clashing like memory and fire. Their forms were perfect, their intentions fractured, and somewhere beneath the fury, each one recognized himself in the other. Ulic was stronger than Exar expected, more focused, more willing to kill. Exar was faster than Ulic believed, more agile, more ruthless. Neither man held back. This was not a duel for power. It was something worse. A test of who could survive the darkness longer without being consumed. The Krath soldiers backed away, uncertain whether they were watching victory or betrayal. Even the air felt fragile now, filled with sparks and tension and something older awakening. And then, in a single breath, it ended. Their blades locked. Neither gave way. But the force around them snapped like a closing wound. A presence returned. Familiar, cold, ancient. Freedom Nad. Not as a whisper now, not as an echo, but as a storm crashing down over both of them. His spirit flared into view between them. Not solid, not smoke, but memory made real. The courtyard shuddered. The force screamed. And both men dropped to one knee, not in submission, but in shock. The spirit looked at Exar first, then at Ulic. "You are both fools," it said, "and both necessary." Neither Jedi moved. You fight for power when power demands unity. The vision turned to Exar. "You are the Dark Lord." Then, to Ulic. "And you are the blade." Exar's grip tightened around his saber. Ulic's eyes narrowed, searching for lies. But Nad gave no room for questions. Join or die in each other's shadow. The words echoed, louder than war, deeper than truth. And as the smoke cleared, both men stood. Not as Jedi, not as enemies, but as something new. They should have walked away. Freedom Nad had spoken. The force had shifted. The choice was offered. But neither Exar Kun nor Ulic Qel-Droma moved. The air still crackled between them. Their lightsabers remained lit, humming, flickering, burning in the twilight. What was meant to end in unity still lingered on the edge of something else. Neither trusted the other. Not yet. Exar was the first to move, a sudden strike, low and fast, a feint designed to draw Ulic's reaction. It worked. Ulic blocked, spun, and struck back. The sparks of their blades lit the dust between them. The spirit of Freedom Nad faded, leaving only tension behind. They fought again. Not out of hatred. Not for power. But because something in both of them still refused to bow. It was not the Jedi in them that was long gone. It was the wound. The one thing they still shared. Exar had broken away from the Order through arrogance, hunger, and silence. Ulic had broken through loss, betrayal, and grief. They had both been left behind. By the Jedi. By their brothers. By the Force itself. So their blades spoke. Each swing echoed a different kind of pain. Exar's movements were surgical, elegant, shaped by obsession. Ulic's strikes were heavier, forged in war, carried by a heart that had lost too much. Their duel raged through the ruined garden of the palace, past broken fountains and statues turned to rubble. The city around them watched in silence, citizens, soldiers, shadows, none daring to interfere. Because they all felt it. This wasn't just a fight. It was a decision. And the Force waited for its answer. Ulic pressed forward with a powerful arc, forcing Exar onto the defensive. Their sabers locked again, grinding, red against red, two crimson blades now, mirroring the paths they had chosen. "You think you're better than me?" Ulic growled. Exar's voice was calm. "I think we're the same." Ulic's eyes burned. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't want it." Exar leaned closer. "I did." The admission cut deeper than any blade. And in that moment, something changed. Their footing faltered. The fury lost its edge. Their strikes slowed not from weakness, but realization. They weren't enemies. They were survivors. Of the same failure. Of the same blindness. Of the same order. The force swelled around them, not violent now, but still and waiting. Ulic stepped back first. His saber lowered. Exar followed. And in the pause that followed, the duel ended not with surrender, not with victory, but with understanding. The dust began to settle. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Not trust, not friendship, but recognition. Exar extinguished his saber. So did Ulic. And for the first time, neither man stood alone. Above them, the wind began to shift. The fire in the distance dimmed. Sinagar held its breath again. But this time, for a different reason. 2 Jedi had fallen. But something else had risen. Together. They didn't know what they had awakened. Not yet. But the galaxy would feel it. Because when 2 blades stop clashing and begin pointing in the same direction, war follows. The courtyard grew quiet after the duel. Not peaceful. Sinagar had forgotten peace, but still enough for the force to settle. Smoke drifted in slow waves above the broken stones. The fires around the palace crackled softly, casting long red shadows that swayed across Exar Kun and Ulic Qel-Droma like threads of fate tying themselves together. They didn't speak. Not at first. Words would have ruined the moment. They were unnecessary. Both men understood exactly what had happened, even if the truth was not yet ready to be said aloud. The darkness had chosen them. Not separately. Not by accident. But together. Ulic broke the silence first. "You came here to challenge me," he said quietly. "Or to kill me." Exar shook his head. "I came to see what the Jedi lost." He paused, eyes narrowing. "And what the Sith could gain." Ulic didn't flinch. He had no illusions left, no hope for redemption. Everything he had once trusted was already shattered. Losing his brother had carved a hole in him the Jedi could not heal. The Krath had left scars on his soul deeper than battle wounds. And still, he stood. Exar stepped closer. "You're powerful, but you're also broken." Ulic's expression hardened, but his voice didn't rise. "So are you." The honesty settled between them like settling dust. Then the air changed. The sky above them dimmed, though no cloud moved. The wind turned cold. The flames across the courtyard bent inward, as if bowing to something unseen. Exar felt the pull first, a deep tremor in the force that pressed against his chest like a memory he had forgotten. Ulic felt it too. Freedom Nad returned. Not in full form this time. Not as a towering specter or a spectral teacher, but as a whisper, a force, a command. The ground beneath them glowed faintly with red lines, thin as cracks, forming a circle around their feet. Ulic stepped back, hand moving instinctively to his saber, but Exar raised his arm. "No," Exar said quietly. "This is the ritual." Ulic stared at him. "What ritual?" Exar did not look away. The one that binds. The circle widened, light pulsing like a heartbeat. Flames curled upward at its edges, forming a ring of fire around them, not hot, not burning, but alive. Ulic felt the pressure behind it, ancient and demanding, a test, a shaping, a forging. Exar stepped into the center. "This is what the Sith are," he said. "Not just anger, not just power, brotherhood, a chain of strength." Ulic hesitated. He had joined the Krath, fallen under Alima's manipulation, lost everything he cared about. But he had never knelt to anyone. Not the Jedi, not the Krath, not even his grief. But Exar wasn't asking him to kneel. He was asking him to stand beside him. The fire rose higher. The force pushed harder. And Ulic stepped forward. The moment his foot crossed into the circle, the flames surged. A column of red light shot upward, connecting the two men in a single arc. Pain struck first sharp, cutting through their cores. Not physical pain, something deeper, a tearing of the soul, separating what they were from what they would become. Ulic clenched his teeth. Exar did not move. The force twisted, binding them with threads of shadow and fire. Their paths, once separate, once doomed, now crossed and fused. A bond stronger than allegiance, stronger than loyalty. A brotherhood. The flames lowered. The circle dimmed. The ritual ended. Ulic exhaled sharply, steadying himself. Exar lifted his gaze, eyes darker than before. It was done. Two fallen Jedi now stood where none should have stood at all. Not apprentices, not rivals, not masters. Brothers, bound in blood, in fire, and in the quiet promise of a war neither fully understood. The fire faded, the wind returned, and the sky above Sinagar opened, empty and wide. But something had changed. Exar Kun stood taller now, not with pride, but with certainty. The ritual had done more than bind him to Ulic Qel-Droma. It had anchored him, defined him, completed him. He was no longer walking toward the dark. He was in it. Ulic stood at his side, eyes still distant, jaw clenched with thoughts he didn't yet know how to speak. His path had been long from the halls of the Jedi Temple to the shadows of the Krath. But now there was clarity in his silence. He wasn't lost anymore. He was chosen. The soldiers of the Krath stepped back, their weapons lowered. The crowd of war-weary citizens that had watched from the broken archways began to whisper. Some knelt, some fled. But all of them understood. A new order had taken root, and it had two heads. Exar turned to Ulic, voice low. "You still have doubts." Ulic didn't answer right away. When he did, it was quiet. "I doubt everything." Exar nodded once. "Good." There was no need for trust, no need for friendship, only purpose. The Sith did not rise by love, they rose by will. And now, that will had been doubled. Two blades forged from different wounds. Two voices shaped by different betrayals. Two fates walking side by side. Ulic's knowledge of the Republic's weaknesses, his experience in war, his ability to command all of it, would serve their cause. Exar had seen it in the Force. He had felt it in the binding ritual. They would not march as conquerors. They would strike as one. But even as they planned, the darkness whispered deeper truths ones neither of them would say aloud. Not yet. They would not walk together forever. There would come a fracture. There would come a cost. But for now, they had what the Jedi feared most. unity. Exar called the Masasi, those ancient, red-skinned warriors who had once guarded Yavin, now answered to him, called by the echo of his will through the Force. They came not through ships or orders, but through instinct, arriving in silence, waiting for the next command. Ulic summoned the remnants of the Krath fleets, cruisers still loyal to his rank, generals who had not yet fled the fire of rebellion. They came, not for belief, but for strength. It was enough. Together, they formed a new army, a new shadow. Their first move would not be loud. It would be precise. They would not attack the Republic directly. They would strike its soul. The Jedi, Ulic knew their tactics. Exar knew their fear. The Order had sensed his fall, but they had not understood its shape. Not until now. The galaxy was shifting. Quietly, slowly, but forever. In the lower chambers of the Synagogue Palace, Exar and Ulic stood before a massive star map, one older than the Republic itself. It displayed the ancient Sith worlds, long forgotten by most, Ziost, Thule, Ambria, and Ossus. Exar's eyes lingered on that last name. A planet of Jedi knowledge. A library of light. A wound waiting to be opened. He touched the edge of the map with his fingertips. Ulic stood beside him. Neither spoke, because the decision had already been made. Two blades now moved through the galaxy. Each sharp, each scarred, each aimed at the heart of everything they had once believed in. And nothing the Jedi had would be enough to stop what came next. It did not begin with a declaration. There was no broadcast, no symbol, no line drawn in starlight to mark the moment peace ended. The Republic kept functioning. The Jedi still taught. Trade flowed, worlds turned. But somewhere quietly, invisibly, the war began. Exar Kun did not raise a fleet. He didn't need to. His weapon was already inside the Jedi Order. In the weeks after his ascension, he moved through the galaxy like a shadow in sunlight, too familiar to question, too focused to stop. He visited Jedi academies. He spoke to students who felt overlooked, uncertain, forgotten. He told them the truth. That the Force was more than control. That the Council feared what they could become. That the darkness was not evil. It was honest. And they listened. Not all, but enough. Across Ossus, Dantooine, and the core enclaves, Jedi Knights began to disappear. Not in violence, not in screams. They simply stopped sending reports. Their ships left no trace. Their names vanished from the Council rolls. The Jedi didn't panic. They whispered of patrols, of secret missions. But the Force trembled, and far from Coruscant, deep within the forgotten temples of Yavin 4, Exar Kun stood at the center of a storm only he understood. Around him, Masasi warriors gathered by the thousands, loyal, fierce, bound by rituals older than the Republic. And beside him, the corrupted Jedi began to return. One by one, with eyes colder than the Order remembered. They were no longer students. They were weapons. In the outer rim, entire systems fell silent. First Iridonia, then Denaba's outposts, then Empress Teta again, not in rebellion, but in blood. Ulic Qel-Droma led the strike. He did not ask for permission. He did not wait for reinforcements. He simply landed and ended the resistance. Civilians watched from broken rooftops as Jedi fell under crimson blades. The Krath followed behind him, cleaning up what the darkness left behind. In some cities, they were welcomed. In others, they were feared. But in all of them, the truth became clear. The Sith had returned. And they were not hiding. The Jedi Council called emergency sessions. Masters from every system were summoned. Ancient texts were reopened. Prophecies re-examined. But it was already too late. Exar Kun did not attack like a warlord. He moved like a corruption. He spread like a belief. While the Jedi debated, he converted. He offered power. He offered clarity. He offered purpose. And in the silence of meditation chambers and lonely starships, that offer echoed louder than any council decree. Jedi Masters began to report strange deaths. Blades drawn in secret. Temples desecrated by unknown hands. Archives burned. Holocrons stolen. They tried to hide it. Tried to control it. But the tremor was growing. The Force was out of balance not because darkness was winning, but because too many Jedi were helping it. At the heart of it all, Exar Kun watched from Yavin 4, his mind reaching across the stars like smoke. Every new defection fed his strength. Every world that fell made him bolder. He didn't need to destroy the Jedi. He only needed to make them doubt. And as their silence deepened, as their unity cracked, the war stopped being something that might happen. It had already begun. They just hadn't realized it yet. The Jedi Temple on Ossus stood in silence. Its towers reached toward the stars like old hands still trying to hold peace. Beneath them, libraries filled with thousands of years of knowledge remained untouched. The wind whispered through the open corridors. Children trained in the ways of the Force. Masters spoke softly of balance, patience, harmony. And the galaxy burned beyond their reach. The Order had not yet accepted it. They still believed this was an isolated storm, that Exar Kun and Ulic Qel-Droma were aberrations, outliers, dark stars drifting far from the heart of the Republic. But war does not wait for belief. It moves through denial like fire through dry wood. And on Ossus, the flame arrived from within. One of the Jedi who had trained there a knight named Credo returned after weeks of silence. He had been thought lost. When he walked through the temple gates, he bowed, smiled, spoke like a brother coming home. And then he struck. Credo turned on his former masters without warning. He shattered holocrons, ignited ancient artifacts, and killed a revered scholar before any could stop him. Others followed, some known, some unrecognized Jedi who had fallen to Exar Kun's teachings and now served a deeper shadow. The Jedi were stunned, not by the violence, but by the faces. They knew these people, had taught them, had meditated beside them, had believed in them. And now, they killed without hesitation. The death toll was small, but the impact was catastrophic. The Jedi Council met behind closed doors for days. The archives were sealed. Lists were created, names of those suspected, those missing, those at risk of falling next. But for many Jedi, it was already too late. The innocence was gone. There could be no return to balance. Because the darkness no longer lived beyond the stars. It lived inside the Order. Exar Kun's strategy had always been personal. He didn't want war in the traditional sense. He wanted collapse from within. He sent agents to temples not to destroy them but to offer students a choice, a new path, a chance to step beyond the limits the Jedi imposed. Some refused. Others hesitated. And a few listened. The Massassi built weapons on Yavin using forbidden techniques. Kun began shaping Force-imbued constructs, dark-side creatures, alchemically twisted and bound to his will. But his greatest weapon was still belief, conviction, the idea that the Jedi were holding something back. And the truth was, they were. For centuries, the Order had ignored the ancient Sith teachings, sealed them, feared them, not because they were false, but because they were dangerous. Exar Kun didn't invent the darkness. He reminded others it existed, and gave it a name they could follow. One by one, Jedi temples fell under assault, not by armies, by decisions. Some masters began locking their doors, refusing to train new students until the council gave answers. Others doubled down, clinging to tradition even as the walls cracked around them. And through it all, Exar Kun smiled. Because he didn't need to defeat the Jedi. He only needed to make them question themselves. And once that question took root, the light would dim on its own. The war became visible. What began as whispers, as defections and temple betrayals, now spread like fire across the stars. Fleets moved, planets burned. Entire systems began to vanish from Republic records, not because of secrecy, but because there was nothing left to record. The first major strike fell upon Forost. It was a naval stronghold, a shipyard world filled with orbital factories and Republic vessels in constant rotation. Defended, vital, believed to be untouchable. Ulic Qel-Droma took it in hours. He arrived with a fleet gathered from the remnants of the Krath and newly pledged Sith loyalists. The Republic was unprepared. Their commanders expected diplomacy. But Ulic brought only silence and flame. He jammed their comms, sabotaged the docked vessels, and when the planetary shields fell, he did not spare the civilians. He didn't need to. They surrendered before he ever landed. Exar Kun did not join the assault. He had no interest in starships. His war was older. He moved instead toward Ambria, a world long scarred by ancient Sith rituals. The Jedi had once tried to heal it, planted seeds, built quiet outposts, sent students to meditate by the dead lake that still boiled from the memory of dark magic. But Kun had no interest in healing. He came to reclaim what the Jedi tried to bury. With him came the Massassi. Their war chants shook the bones of the earth. The Jedi stationed on Ambria fought back. They were few healers, archivists, not warriors. Their lightsabers lit the red plains in brief flashes of resistance. But Kun did not fight them with rage. He offered them knowledge. Most refused. He killed the ones who stood in his way. And to the others, he gave ancient books, Sith scrolls, holocrons still bleeding with dark energy. Not all accepted, but one or two listened, and that was enough. Because one Jedi lost in silence could do more damage than 10 fallen in battle. Back on Forost, Ulic continued expanding his reach. He turned his attention to Nymoidia, then to Chazwa, then to Korbos, once the site of the Jedi's victory over the Dark Jedi in the 100-year darkness. He retook it with a whisper. To the Republic, the war now looked like something familiar: borders drawn, ships deployed, numbers tallied. But that illusion collapsed when they reached Ossus. By then, the Jedi knew what was coming. They prepared. They gathered fleets. They recalled masters. They readied defenses not just of shields and weapons, but of will. And it still wasn't enough. Because when Ulic Qel-Droma arrived, he did not come alone. Exar Kun was with him. And behind them came a wave of ships and warriors who no longer remembered who they once were. Jedi turned executioners. Massassi shaped into weapons. Creatures of alchemical birth, armored in pain. The battle for Ossus began in orbit. It ended on the ground. Libraries collapsed, temples crumbled. Jedi died defending scrolls, not just lives. And in the heart of it all, Ulic moved like a storm, not with hate, but with emptiness. The kind of emptiness that feels nothing when it ends what it once loved. Exar Kun did not stay. He had come for something else. A specific artifact. A secret hidden deep in the vaults. Something even the Council feared to name. He found it, and left Ossus to burn behind him. This was not conquest. This was erasure. And across the stars, as the war spread, something deeper was lost than territory or fleets. The Republic still stood, but the galaxy no longer looked the same. The Great Sith War did not end with a final battle. It ended with a silence. Not peace silence. The kind that settles after something breaks so completely that there is no sound left to make. Across the Republic, worlds still burned. Cities still smoldered beneath drifting ash. But the noise of war, the alarms, the screams, the thunder of fleets faded slowly, replaced by a deeper, heavier quiet. The kind that always follows devastation too large to understand. The Jedi felt it first. Their temples no longer hummed with the steady rhythm of countless voices in meditation. The halls were emptier, the archives quieter. Rooms once filled with younglings now stood untouched, the air heavy with dust and memories. Whole lineages had been severed. Entire branches of teaching lost. Master after master sat in stillness, listening to a force that no longer felt familiar. It was raw, wounded, stripped of balance. A connection frayed, trembling like a string pulled too far. They had survived the war, but they had not saved themselves from the cost. On Ossus, ruins stretched as far as the horizon, shattered towers, collapsed libraries, scorched plains still glowing from the firestorm Exar Kun had unleashed. The wind carried fragments of pages, once filled with knowledge gathered over millennia. History lost itself in the smoke. The Republic tried to rebuild. Workers cleared streets. Engineers reconnected power grids. Senators delivered speeches promising recovery. But beneath their voices lay fear, quiet, unspoken, heavy. They grew cautious with each passing day, unsure which ally might turn, which world might fall next. Because Exar Kun had changed more than battle lines. He had changed belief. The Council gathered for the first full assembly since the conflict began. Some masters did not return. Others arrived bearing scars that would never heal. They spoke in hushed tones, shared reports, compared losses. But one truth overshadowed everything spoken. The golden age of the Jedi was over. Not because they were defeated, because they had seen themselves fall. In the deepest chambers of Yavin 4, Exar Kun prepared his final act. The Massassi gathered around him, chanting words no longer heard anywhere else in the galaxy. The walls glowed with ancient energy. The air rippled with a darkness thick as smoke. He felt the Jedi closing in. He felt the Republic marshalling its final fleets. But he did not flee. He did not surrender. He did not break. He transformed. The ritual he performed that night tore across the Force like a scream swallowed by shadow. It cost him his body, his form, his mortality, leaving only spirit, hatred, and memory trapped within the stone of Yavin's temples. It was not death. It was survival. The kind the Sith had perfected. When the Jedi finally arrived, they found only ruins and fire. The Massassi turned to ash, and a darkness that could no longer be killed. Not by blade, not by army, only by time. Back in the Republic, the war officially ended. Treaties were signed. Systems reconfirmed allegiance. Life, in its stubborn way, tried to return. But scars do not fade just because the fighting stops. Families mourned. Jedi rebuilt. Children stared at the sky with new fear. And the Order, the great, ancient order, stood smaller than ever, both in number and in certainty. They had won, but victory felt like loss. In meditation, masters heard echoes they could not silence, memories of students who had fallen, names they could no longer speak. The Force, once a calm river, now felt like a broken sea. And somewhere across that sea, drifting in silence, a shadow waited. The age of light had dimmed. The age of war had reshaped the galaxy. And the golden age of the Jedi ended not in triumph, but in quiet. A quiet the Order would spend generations trying to understand. The war had changed him. Ulic Qel-Droma was still a general, still a warrior, still one of the most feared names in the galaxy. But inside, something had shifted. He didn't speak of it, he didn't show it. But Exar Kun sensed it with every passing day. Ulic was pulling away. Not in defiance, not in betrayal, but in grief. The fire that once drove him, the righteous fury, the cold precision, the need to destroy the order that failed him, it had softened. Not into peace, into numbness. And then, it broke. It happened on Ossus. Not during the great firestorm. Not during the fall of the archives. That had already passed. The Jedi had returned to the wreckage, scattered, rebuilding, wounded. But Ulic came back not to conquer. He came chasing a shadow of his past. His brother. Qel-Droma had survived the worst of the war. He had held to the code, even as Ulic walked away from it. He had believed, even when the galaxy told him not to. And now, he stood before his brother with open hands. He didn't raise his weapon. He didn't accuse. He asked Ulic to stop, to come home. The other soldiers stepped back. Massassi warriors watched in silence. Even the Jedi didn't interfere. This wasn't a duel. It was something older. Something quieter. Kay stepped closer. Ulic's lightsaber was already in his hand. He told himself he was in control, that this conversation was just a formality, that the war couldn't be stopped now, that Kay couldn't understand. But none of those thoughts felt real anymore. He didn't want to kill him. He wanted to be forgiven. Kay placed a hand on his shoulder. For a second, a single second, Ulic saw it all. The days in the Jedi Temple, the laughter between missions, the promises they made before everything collapsed. And then the pain surged. All of it. The betrayal. The failure. The guilt. And in that crack, the darkness answered. His blade ignited. It moved faster than thought. When he looked down, Kay was on the ground, eyes wide in disbelief. Smoke curled from his robes, the light in his face already fading. Ulic didn't move, didn't breathe. He had acted without intention. But the result was the same. His brother was dying. The Massassi turned away. Even they understood this wasn't a victory. This was a fracture. Ulic fell to his knees beside Kay. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." But the Force didn't answer. Kay tried to speak. A flicker of breath. A trace of a smile. And then, stillness. Ulic reached out to feel his brother in the Force. But there was only silence. A silence that screamed. He dropped his saber. His body shook. Not from rage. From regret. the kind that can't be undone, the kind that never leaves. He didn't resist when the Jedi surrounded him. He didn't flee, didn't fight, didn't speak, because something inside him had died long before they placed him in chains. When Exar Kun felt the disturbance, he knew. He felt Ulic vanish not in death, but in purpose. Their bond shattered, not through betrayal, but through heartbreak. Ulic had done the one thing even the Sith could not control. He stopped believing in himself. And in that moment, the war began to end. The galaxy did not pause for Ulic Qel-Droma's grief. War rarely shows mercy. It keeps moving, even when the people fighting it can't. Armies advanced, fleets gathered, orders were issued. But for Ulic, everything had stopped on that battlefield beside Kay's fallen body. He was no longer the general who had taken Forost. No longer the blade Exar Kun had forged. No longer the fallen Jedi who had once believed he could reshape the Republic. He was simply a man who had killed his brother. The chains they placed on his wrists felt weightless compared to that truth. The Jedi did not strike him, did not condemn him. Their silence was worse. They looked at him as if seeing a ghost, someone already dead, walking only by habit. They escorted him to their transport with quiet eyes and steady hands, as though he might shatter if touched too harshly. Ulic didn't resist. There was nothing left to resist for. Exar Kun felt the fracture as soon as it happened. No vision, no whisper, just a pull, sharp, sudden, irreversible, tearing the bond between them down the middle. He reached for Ulic through the Force. Found nothing. Not a barrier. Not defiance. Just emptiness. The kind that follows deep loss. The kind that swallows belief. Exar paced through his temples on Yavin 4, shadows trailing him like smoke. The Massassi watched from a distance, sensing the storm inside their master. His fury wasn't loud. It never had been. It was a cold thing, coiling tighter with each passing hour. He trusted Ulic, relied on him, believed in him in a way the Sith did not often allow. But Ulic was slipping away. Not dying. Breaking. The Republic announced his capture within days. The broadcast spread across the core worlds, a glimmer of hope in a war that had felt hopeless for too long. Jedi Masters gathered in their chambers, whispering of redemption, of justice, of closure. Exar listened from afar, teeth clenched. He knew the Jedi didn't understand. Couldn't understand. Ulic wasn't just a commander. He was half of the shadow they had cast upon the galaxy. Without him, the Sith Brotherhood weakened, cracked, and Exar was left alone. The Massassi entered with reports, fleets slowing, allies hesitating, Sith followers uncertain. Ulic had been the face of their advance. Exar was the mind behind it. Remove one, and the machinery of war stuttered. But the reports didn't matter. Exar dismissed them with a wave of his hand. What mattered was Ulic, the only person in the galaxy who knew the depths of Exar's ambition, the only person who walked with him willingly into darkness, the only person who understood the silence left behind by a broken faith. Exar reached out again through the Force. This time he found something. Not strength, not fury, grief. A vast, hollow ache. Sharp, heavy, unending. It wasn't directed at Exar. It wasn't directed at the Jedi. It wasn't directed anywhere. It simply was. The pain of someone who could no longer bear the weight of the path he'd chosen. Exar exhaled slowly. He was losing Ulic. Not to the enemy, to his own heart. The bond that once united them, forged in fire and ritual, was thinning, fraying like old rope. Exar tried to hold it together, pushing his voice through the force, demanding Ulic listen, calling him back to purpose, to war, to the fate they had built together. But Ulic didn't answer. Not because he wouldn't. Because he couldn't. His heart had finally broken. And in that quiet collapse, the Sith Brotherhood began to die from the inside, not through betrayal or rebellion, but through sorrow, a sorrow Exar Kun would soon face alone. They brought him to trial. Ulic Qel-Droma, once a Jedi Knight, once a general of the Krath, once the right hand of Exar Kun, now stood before the council in chains. Not as a warrior, not even as a prisoner. As a man undone. He did not speak in his defense. He offered no excuse. He stood still, eyes hollow, as Jedi Masters listed his crimes. Systems burned, temples destroyed, lives extinguished, and at the end of it all, one name remained heavier than all the others. His brother. Some on the council wanted exile. Others wanted imprisonment. A few, in quiet corners, asked whether justice could exist for someone who had already lost everything. But none of them expected what came next. Nomi Sunrider stepped forward. She had once fought beside Ulic, once believed in him. Now she stood before him, robes scorched from war, hands trembling not with anger, but with heartbreak. "You taught me strength," she said softly. Ulic didn't meet her eyes. "You showed me what the Force could be," she whispered. "And now you've shown me what it can destroy." The room grew still. Nomi raised her hand. No weapon, no command, just the Force. And then she reached inside him. Not to hurt, to take. A surge of light burst through the chamber, not violent but blinding. The masters flinched. The guards stepped back. Ulic staggered, his breath catching as if something essential had been torn away. And it had. The Force. Gone. He reached for it. Felt nothing. Not a whisper. Not a flicker. It was as if a limb had been severed, but the body had not yet realized it. He dropped to his knees. No cry, no resistance. Just stillness. Nomi lowered her hand, tears streaking down her face. "I didn't mean to," she whispered. I couldn't let you keep going." But Ulic was no longer listening. He couldn't feel her. He couldn't feel anything. He was alive, but hollow. Across the galaxy, Exar Kun staggered mid-step. The Masasi rushed to steady him, but he shoved them away. He had felt the moment. A tear in the Force where Ulic once stood. He reached across the stars, not in rage, but in panic. He searched for the presence that had once moved in tandem with his own. The other half of the weapon they had become. But Ulic was gone. Not dead. Not lost. Severed. Exar stood in silence for hours after. No commands. No rituals. He sat alone in the great temple, staring into the darkness without speaking. This was not betrayal. This was worse. Ulic hadn't turned against him. He had simply disappeared. And without him, the war began to falter. Republic fleets pressed forward. Jedi morale surged. The cracks in Exar's empire widened. He had always known that one day, the Jedi would come for them. He just never imagined Ulic wouldn't be there when they did. Far away, in a quiet cell, Ulic sat with his eyes closed. He didn't meditate. He couldn't. He didn't weep. He had no strength for it. He simply sat in silence, day after day, hour after hour, waiting for something to return. It never did. The Force was gone. The war was ending. And the man who had once helped bring the Republic to its knees now couldn't lift a single stone. Not because he lacked power, but because he no longer believed he deserved it. The stars above Yavin 4 no longer answered him. Exar Kun sat in the highest chamber of his temple, eyes fixed on the canopy of night beyond the stone arches. The war had changed. The tides had shifted. And though the galaxy still feared his name, he was alone. Ulic Qel-Droma was gone. And without him, the foundation beneath everything Exar had built began to tremble. The Massassi still obeyed. The fallen Jedi still knelt. But something deeper had fractured. Because only Ulic had understood the silence between Exar's words. Only Ulic had stood at his side, not as a follower, but as an equal, a blade forged in grief to match his own. Now that blade had broken, and Exar felt exposed. He did not show it. He didn't allow weakness before the others. But when the darkness grew quiet, when the rituals ended, when the torches burned low and no one else was watching, he let the silence press in. He reached for Ulic again in the Force. Still nothing. A void where there had once been fire. The Jedi were advancing now. With each passing week, their fleets closed the gap. Their courage had returned. Rumors reached Yavin of Republic worlds reclaiming their strength, of Jedi Masters leading counterattacks, of the galaxy healing faster than he expected. And all of it traced back to one truth. Ulic Qel-Droma was no longer a threat. He was a symbol. A reminder that even the darkest could fall, and still come back broken. Exar knew what would come next. The Jedi would come for him. Not in skirmishes. Not through politics. They would come in force. They would come to end him. He had always planned for that day. The ancient Sith had prepared rituals for it, ways to transcend, to survive beyond death, to leave behind body and flesh and become something more. Not a man, not a master, a spirit. He began those rituals now. Slowly, quietly. The Massassi helped him prepare the chamber. Blood was spilled, crystals carved, glyphs inscribed into the stone. He worked without rest, speaking words older than the Republic, summoning energies buried for 10,000 years. But no matter how far he reached, he still missed Ulic. Not the warrior, not the weapon, the presence, the mirror, the only one who had ever understood what it felt like to burn alone. One night, as the storm rolled over Yavin's jungles, Exar Kun stood at the threshold of the ritual chamber, robes soaked with rain, hands shaking not from fear but from memory. He saw flashes, Dantooine, Sinagar, two blades clashing in fire, two paths becoming one. He wondered if Ulic still remembered. He wondered if Ulic could feel anything at all. The answer never came. And so, Exar Kun, the Dark Lord of the Sith, turned inward. His final plans were no longer for domination. They were for survival. He would not let the Jedi take him. Not his body, not his knowledge, and not his legacy. He would bury himself in the stone, fuse his spirit into the temple walls, wait and endure. Because war ends, but darkness waits. Still, as he descended into the lower chamber, as the chanting rose and the flames grew tall, he paused. Just once. just long enough to whisper a name he hadn't spoken since the day the war began to crumble. Ulic. The wind did not answer. The force did not answer. Only silence. And for the first time, Exar Kun knew what it felt like to be truly alone. The sky above Yavin 4 had changed. It no longer burned red with storms. It no longer carried the voices of Massassi war chants or the echo of Sith incantations. It was quiet now, not peaceful, but quiet. The kind of silence that arrives just before something ends. Exar Kun stood alone in the highest tower of his temple. The force felt different here, not because it was fading, but because it had begun to pull inward. The galaxy no longer sent him answers, it waited. He had known this day would come. From the moment Ulic fell silent. From the moment Ossus burned. From the moment the Republic began to remember what courage felt like. The Jedi were coming. Not in whispers or rumors in ships. Dozens of them. Exar could see the sky shift as their fleets approached. Distant shadows above the clouds. Republic cruisers. Jedi vessels. Transports full of warriors who once called him brother, now wielding the light like a sword. But he did not tremble. He did not rally what remained of his forces. He had no armies left to command. His Sith followers had either died or fled. The Krath were shattered. Ulic was lost, not dead, but gone in a way even the Force could not repair. The Massassi still obeyed, but they were fading too. Weaker, bound by ritual, not strength. All Exar had left was the temple, and what waited inside it. The stone beneath his feet had been carved centuries before he was born, not by Jedi, not by Sith, but by something older, a cult that understood the Force not as balance or order, but as hunger. He had studied that hunger, fed it, listened to it, and now he would become it. He walked the hallways slowly. No guards, no sound, just the whisper of his robes trailing behind him. The murals along the walls flickered with fading torchlight images of conquest, ascension, pain. Moments etched by Massassi artists who had long since bled their last for him. Each image told the same story. That the flesh was weak. That power was not survival but transformation. Exar Kun had already died once. On Korriban, when the tomb accepted him. On Sinagar, when he forged a bond in flame. On Ossus, when he walked away with secrets that even the Jedi had buried. What remained was not a man. It was a choice waiting to be made permanent. He reached the center of the temple, a vast chamber sealed from the stars, where the walls curved inward like the belly of some slumbering god. Here, the air was thick with the Force, not light, not dark. Something deeper, waiting to be claimed. The ritual was ready. He had prepared it in pieces, every chant, every sigil, every blood-stained mark drawn from scrolls, stolen and burned, fused with knowledge no Jedi dared remember. But it would not be enough. The cost had to be paid. Exar turned toward the steps behind him. The Massassi waited there. Silent, loyal, unquestioning. They had followed him through war, through transformation, through pain, and now they would follow him through death. Not theirs. His. They did not flinch when he raised his hand. They did not flee when the Force wrapped around them. They stepped forward, willingly, because they believed, because they understood, and because the sky above Yavin 4 had begun to weep fire. The Jedi had arrived, and Exar Kun would not meet them as a man. He would become something else. The Massassi did not fear death. They had been shaped for it. Born in the shadows of forgotten temples, molded by rituals older than their language, they had followed Exar Kun without hesitation from the moment he first stepped onto Yavin 4. To them, he was not a master. He was destiny. And now destiny required sacrifice. Exar descended into the deepest chamber, a place no Massassi entered without purpose. The air grew thicker the deeper they went, heavy with incense and the metallic scent of old blood. Torches lined the walls, burning blue instead of gold, their flames bending inward as if bowing to the presence entering the room. At the center stood the altar. Stone, cold, ancient, etched with symbols that didn't speak of power, but of cost. Exar paused before it. This was the moment the ancient Sith had feared, the one they prepared for but never reached. The Jedi were coming in numbers no single warrior could face. Fleets filled the sky above the moon. Masters of the Order swept through the jungle, guided by the Force directly to this place. He could not defeat them, but he could outlive them. Not in body. In essence, the ritual required life not stolen violently, but given freely. It demanded a bridge, a collection of spirits, a well of power strong enough to sustain consciousness beyond flesh. The Massassi stepped forward. They knelt in a circle around him, heads bowed, hands pressed to the floor. Their shadows stretched in long shapes across the chamber, merging at the center like a single living organism. They did not speak. They did not ask. They simply waited. Exar raised his hand. For a moment, something inside him trembled. Not doubt, not regret. Something quieter, the memory of what it meant to stand beside another living being and not consume it. But memories meant nothing now. He whispered the first words of the incantation. The torches flickered. The chamber walls vibrated. The Force twisted in a way no Jedi would dare to feel. The Massassi lifted their heads, eyes glowing faintly as the ritual claimed them. Their breaths grew heavy, echoing through the chamber like synchronized drums. One by one, they leaned forward until their hands touched the carvings on the floor. And then the pain began. It did not strike them like lightning. It spread slowly, seeping through their limbs and into their cores. They arched backward, muscles shaking, not in rebellion but in offering. Their life force, their essence rose from their bodies like smoke. Exar felt it. A warmth at first, gentle and almost human. Then heat. Then fire. It rushed into him in waves, each one stronger than the last. The power of a warrior, the strength of a tribe, the devotion of a race that no longer knew any path but his. The Massassi cried out. Not in suffering, in exaltation. Their voices became one, rising in a chant they had never been taught but somehow remembered. A language spoken only in rituals where the line between life and death blurred to nothing. Exar closed his eyes. He felt their hearts, their loyalty, their surrender. Each life braided itself into his own. One by one, their bodies slumped to the floor empty, still, silent, but their spirits did not fade. They spiraled upward, pulled into the vortex, forming above the altar, merging into something vast and terrible. Exar breathed in, and the vortex entered him. His skin pulsed with light. His veins darkened. His eyes filled with something that was not human. The transformation had begun. When Exar finally opened his eyes, the chamber was filled with bodies, cold and unmoving. Hundreds of lives taken. Hundreds of spirits bound. He did not mourn them. He honored them. because this was the price of becoming more than flesh. And the Jedi were already at his door. They landed at dawn. The Jedi did not come with banners or speeches. No triumph, no vengeance, only purpose. Ships descended through the canopy, scattering birds and shaking the earth. Ramps lowered. Boots touched soil still warm from rituals the Force could no longer explain. They felt it before they saw it. The darkness, it wasn't loud. It didn't strike them down or rise to meet them like fire. It just pressed against their chests, wrapped around their bones, made the air harder to breathe. A weight without form. Exar Kun was near. Master Thon stepped first into the jungle, robes damp with dew, eyes narrowed against the wind. Behind him came Nomi Sunrider and Vodo Siosk Bars, Exar's former teacher. None of them spoke. They didn't need to. The Force had already shown them what waited ahead. But even the visions hadn't prepared them for the silence. The temple was still. No guards. No Masasi. No lights. The stone structure loomed above the trees like a scar across the sky. It was not ruined. It stood tall, whole yet lifeless, as if the ground itself had exhaled one final breath, and gone still. The Jedi moved in small groups, fanning out across the outer courtyards. No traps, no resistance. Only statues, towering and ancient, faces worn smooth by wind and time. The carvings stared down at them with expressions of hunger and warning. Vodo paused at the threshold of the temple gate. He had stood there before, years ago, when Exar was still his student, arrogant, brilliant, curious. A boy who asked too many questions. And now, there was no boy left. Only echoes. They stepped into the temple. It did not welcome them. It watched. Every torch was lit, but none burned. The flames sat still, blue and unmoving. The air carried no dust, no rot, no scent of decay. It was too clean, too cold. As if the place had stopped aging. The deeper they walked, the stranger it became. One corridor was filled with murals not painted, but etched into stone. They showed visions that bent time, Jedi kneeling before Sith, temples rising from rivers of blood, stars falling like rain. None of the images made sense, but all of them felt remembered. Another hallway opened into a circular room where the walls had been inscribed with names, hundreds of them Jedi names. Some known, some lost, some alive. All crossed out. Nomi reached out to touch one and flinched. It burned. Not with fire, with grief. They pressed forward. The temple was not empty. It was full, filled with memory, regret, shadows of decisions that could never be undone. Every step they took felt like trespassing through a wound. And still, no sign of Exar. The Jedi gathered in the central chamber, at last the heart of the structure. The floor was dark. The walls pulsed faintly with veins of red crystal, glowing like a heartbeat buried beneath stone. Master Thon stepped forward. "This is where it ends," he said quietly. But he was wrong. Because Exar Kun was already gone. Not in body, that part still remained, somewhere deeper, but his presence had changed. He was no longer a figure to be confronted. He had become something else. They didn't know it yet. But the temple did. It felt them, measured them. And slowly, the doors behind them began to close. Stone grinding against stone. Light dimming. The chamber darkened. The Jedi raised their sabers. Not in battle. In defense. Not against a man. against a place that had decided to remember. The chamber pulsed, not with sound, but with something deeper, the slow, steady beat of a presence that no longer had breath, no longer had form, but refused to die. Exar Kun was not standing in the temple when the Jedi reached the sanctum. He was already inside the stone. His body, what remained of it, knelt at the center of the ritual circle, still, rigid, eyes open but lifeless. His skin was cracked with veins of blackened light, as if the Force had carved through him like lightning frozen in flesh. The Jedi did not strike. They didn't need to. The war was over. And yet, it wasn't. Nomi Sunrider stepped forward. She didn't speak. She didn't weep. She reached out through the Force, not with anger, but with sorrow. The others followed, a dozen Jedi surrounding the Dark Lord in silence. Each of them extended their hands, their minds, their energy, not to kill, but to contain. The light gathered. It poured into the chamber like water, calm, steady, unyielding. It met the darkness embedded in the walls, in the blood-stained floor, in the ritual that had consumed an entire race of Massassi warriors. And that's when Exar Kun finally moved. Not his body. His spirit. The Force trembled. The temple shook. A scream, not of voice, but of memory, erupted from the stone, echoing across the chamber in every direction. The walls pulsed with shadows. The flames roared to life, not blue now, but crimson. And from the center of the circle, Exar Kun rose. Not with flesh, with will. His form appeared above the altar, suspended in air, eyes glowing like coals submerged in ice. His voice filled the room, layered with thousands of whispers. "You are too late." The Jedi did not break. They pressed harder. Exar snarled, not in pain, but in rage. Not because he feared destruction, but because he feared what he could no longer control. His spirit flared, reaching into each of them, pulling at their doubt, their exhaustion, their fear of failure. He found pieces to grab hold of. But not enough. Together, the Jedi formed a circle. A single current of light. Exar pushed harder. Images flooded the room: war, betrayal, burning temples, Ulic screaming as the Force was torn from him. All of it came pouring out, a final weapon, memory. But the Jedi held. Nomi stepped forward and spoke the words the temple feared most. Enough. With that, the light surged. It didn't destroy him. It sealed him. Exar's spirit collapsed inward, screaming, spiraling into the stone like a star pulled into itself. His final cry echoed once, then vanished. His body crumbled to dust. The temple stilled. The Force grew quiet again. The Jedi stood in silence. No cheers. No triumph. Only stillness. They knew better than to believe they had truly won. Because Exar Kun had not been defeated in the way Sith are meant to be. He had not been redeemed. He had not begged. He had not broken. He had endured. Somewhere beneath their feet, his presence still lingered, faint, almost gone, but not gone enough. A spirit suspended. Waiting. The Jedi left Yavin 4 inches silence. They did not speak of what they had seen. They did not return with relics or victory songs. They left the temple sealed. Not to hide what was inside, but to warn what remained, that they were watching. But even as their ships lifted into the sky, even as the jungle swallowed the scars of war, a single truth lingered beneath the stone. Exar Kun had not died. He had transcended, and the galaxy had not seen the last of him. There was no death. Not in the way the Jedi understood it. Exar Kun's body crumbled in the center of his temple robes turned to ash, flesh devoured by the ritual he had prepared. But the moment his spirit was supposed to fade, it didn't. It held on. Not with fear, with purpose. The stone absorbed him, not like a prison, but like a home carved out of shadow. His essence spread through the walls, the altar, the stairwells and catacombs, the broken airshafts and ancient murals. Every carved line of Massassi scripture now pulsed faintly with something left behind. He was not dead. He was waiting. At first, time still made sense. He felt the passing days, the soft decay of torches gone cold. The jungle reclaiming what it could not understand. Roots pierced the lower halls. Moss crawled up the towers. The temple darkened. And still, he watched. The force had changed. It no longer flowed through him, but around him distant, distorted, like voices underwater. He reached for it, but could not grasp it. He spoke, but there was no sound. Thought became the only thing that survived. Thought and memory. He relived his life in fragments. The halls of the Jedi Temple. The first forbidden scroll. Korriban. Synagogue. Ulic's voice, rising in fury then fading into silence. Kay's body, falling to the ground. The scream that followed. The quiet that came after. Every moment returned, again and again, looping not as punishment but as fuel. Regret did not exist here. Only will. The Jedi had sealed him, but they had not destroyed him. And so he lingered. After a decade, he stopped counting the years. After a century, he stopped feeling them. The stars above Yavin shifted positions. The moons changed phases, the jungle thickened. Entire ecosystems evolved and died around the temple. Storms broke the sky open. Lightning scarred the towers. But the foundation held. And so did he. No one came for a long time. No Jedi, no Sith, no explorers. Just silence. And in that silence, Exar Kun endured. He did not speak. But he listened. The galaxy trembled now and then. He could feel it through the force, through the stone, through the aching bones of the planet itself. Wars erupted in far-off systems. Entire empires rose and collapsed. New dark side powers touched the galaxy and vanished before he could reach them. The Sith changed. Their names, their teachings, their code. But none remembered him. And still, he waited. He dreamed, though he did not sleep. He imagined new apprentices, ones who would understand, who would not fear what he had become. He imagined tearing open the Jedi Council again. Not with armies, with knowledge. Because knowledge had always been the weapon the Order feared most. He imagined the Massassi alive once more, their chants rising through the temple like thunder. But dreams were nothing without voices, and Yavin 4 remained quiet. Until it wasn't. A ship landed once, small, unmarked. An explorer, perhaps. They never entered the temple, just passed by, paused, shivered, left. But Exar felt them, felt the potential. And, for a moment, the stone beneath his spirit tightened, like lungs trying to draw in a breath that had long since been forgotten. He wasn't ready yet. They weren't either. But someday, someone would come too close. And when they did, Exar Kun would not ask for a body. He would ask for a mind. The galaxy moved on. It always did. Exar Kun once stood at the heart of its collapse, the name whispered in fear, the shadow behind every Jedi's doubt. But now, no one spoke of him. The Republic rebuilt. New masters rose. New students were trained. The Great Sith War became another chapter in the archives, its details softened by time, its tragedies reduced to footnotes. Exar's name was recorded, but not remembered. A villain, they said. A war criminal. A fallen Jedi who vanished in a temple that no one dared reopen. Yavin 4 became sacred in silence. Not guarded. Avoided. Ships passed by the system without pausing. Jedi historians marked the moon as restricted. Archaeologists called it cursed. There were too many missing crews, too many reports of vessels failing systems as they drifted too close. No one came. And Exar Kun faded further. He felt the passing of time not as moments, but as absences. Absences of voices, of memories, of minds to reach for. Centuries bled together. Civilizations rose, fell, and rose again. Coruscant changed. The Jedi Temple was rebuilt, then destroyed again. The Sith returned not as whispers, but in armor and armies. Darth Bane, Darth Zana, Darth Plagueis, names that carried weight, but no memory of him. None of them searched for Yavin. None sought the truth of what had come before. And why would they? The galaxy had rewritten itself. The Jedi believed in new codes. The Sith spoke of rules that would have made the old lords laugh. Even the Force began to feel different, dimmer, faster, thinner. Exar Kun did not mourn. He observed. He measured. And beneath the temple, he waited. Once, during a planetary alignment, his spirit surged without warning. Energy poured through the moon's crust like fire through ancient veins. He felt his presence grow larger, expand through the jungle canopy, reach toward the stars like a scream buried too long. But no one heard it. The moment passed, and he sank back into the stone. Centuries later, a Jedi passed through Yavin's orbit. They did not land, but they sensed something, a shadow at the edge of perception. They noted it, reported it. The council dismissed it. Another rumor. Another ghost. Exar smiled. They had forgotten. Even Ulic's name had become a myth. Kay's death reduced to a single sentence in a data file. Ossus had fallen, then changed, then vanished beneath oceans of time. The Sith were no longer warriors of truth and pain. They were politicians, secret lords, hungry ghosts in bureaucratic masks. There was no memory. Only performance. Exar watched it all. From beneath the temple. From within the walls. From a silence thick enough to drown the stars. And somewhere, buried beneath his waiting, something colder stirred. He had not wanted revenge. Not at first. But as the centuries passed, and the galaxy forgot the truth, the real truth, something hardened in him. They had erased him. And in that erasure, they had made room for weakness. He had fought the Jedi at their peak. He had stood against fleets, councils, armies. He had broken temples with a whisper. And now, no one remembered why they should be afraid of him. The longer he waited, the quieter his hatred became. Not loud, not reckless, just steady, like a knife held in the dark. Because legends die in silence. But spirits do not. They wait. And one day, they are remembered. Not by history, but by the next person foolish enough to come too close. It started slowly. A disturbance in the leaves. The faint crunch of boots on moss. The sound of voices echoing through the jungle. too distant to understand, too close to ignore. Someone had landed. Exar Kun felt it immediately. The temple stirred, not with power, but with curiosity. The force moved in strange ways when the living approached. It shifted like wind around corners, brushing against the walls, pressing softly into places where no light had entered for centuries. He listened. At first, it was only one. A scavenger, a lost pilot. Their presence was dim, barely a flicker in the force, like a candle kept behind glass. They didn't enter the temple, just circled it, wandered the ruins. Their hand brushed the stone once, and Exar whispered. Not words. Emotion. A feeling weightless at first, then heavy. A quiet pressure in the chest. The kind that makes a man stop walking for no reason. The kind that leaves the back cold. The kind that turns curiosity into fear. They left within the hour. But something had changed. He could feel it. A pattern reawakening. Over the next decades, others came. Not often, but enough. Archaeologists, Jedi scouts, researchers, chasing forgotten history. Most turned back before setting foot inside. Some crossed the threshold. None stayed long. One collapsed at the base of the altar. His mind cracked open like glass under stress. No words, no scream, just silence. His comrades carried him out, muttering about force echoes, about trauma in the stone. They never returned. And Exar waited. He didn't try to kill them. Not yet. He wanted to understand how far they had drifted from the Jedi he once knew. He reached gently, touching their memories like pages in a forgotten book. Their thoughts were quick, distracted. Their understanding of the Force shallow, all balance and compassion, none of it built for war. None of them were ready. But one day, one of them would be. He watched a group of explorers set up camp near the temple entrance. They argued about whether to enter. One of them meditated outside the steps. The jungle grew quiet for hours. Exar reached for her mind. She resisted. Barely. She was strong, young, curious. But not open. Not yet. He lingered in her dreams that night. Showed her flashes, not nightmares but questions. A hallway stretching longer than it should. A name she couldn't quite remember. A face without eyes. She woke gasping. They left the next morning. Years passed. Each visit left behind something new. A handprint scorched into stone. A recording device shorted with static. A datapad whose contents rewrote themselves in symbols no one could translate. Rumors began to spread again. Not loud ones. Quiet ones. Yavin 4 had a shadow. The temple had a presence. The jungle watched people walk but never welcomed them. Some said it was cursed. A few said it was haunted. None said his name. But Exar didn't care. The galaxy had forgotten him. But the Force had not. It still ran through the soil, through the bones of the Massassi buried beneath the foundations, through the walls carved in blood and sacrifice. It pulsed when Jedi drew near. It trembled when children cried near the fire. It remembered. And through it, Exar whispered. Never loud, never clear, just enough. Enough to remind the stars that something still breathed behind the stone. Waiting. Time kept moving. Seasons changed. Storms tore through the jungle. Roots split old stone. But inside the temple, Exar Kun did not feel age. He felt the galaxy turning far above him, brighter some centuries, darker in others. Empires rose and fell like tides. The Sith vanished, returned, vanished again. Jedi orders collapsed, rebuilt, fractured. And then the day came when he felt something he had not sensed in millennia. Light. Not the distant, weakened glow of passing Force sensitives. Not the flicker of explorers who stumbled too close. This was stronger, steady, unprotected, young. It approached the temple with no fear at all. The walls tightened around his spirit. The stones resonated in low vibrations, ancient muscles remembering battle. Exar extended his awareness outward like a hand reaching through water. He expected a knight, a scholar, a seeker of lost lore. Instead, he felt a boy, a child, not yet tempered by war, not hardened by the failures that shaped older Jedi. His thoughts were open, bright, filled with questions he didn't yet know how to hide. Beside him walked other students, inexperienced but hopeful, and above them all, guiding them like a quiet star, was a presence Exar recognized from whispers in the Force. Luke Skywalker. He did not know the name, not truly, but he knew the shape of the lineage. The echo of the Chosen One still lingered in the Force like a wound that had never fully healed. Luke carried the same quiet grief, the same stubborn hope, the same refusal to surrender to darkness. He walked into the temple like someone searching for redemption rather than glory. The Jedi had returned to Yavin not to destroy, to rebuild. Exar watched them step across the threshold, their footsteps echoing faintly through chambers that had been silent longer than any of them had been alive. The young ones touched the walls with awe. Luke closed his eyes, sensing something painful beneath the surface. Something he could not explain. Something ancient. Something wounded. Exar Kun did not reveal himself. Not yet. He observed, listened, measured. The students laughed, practiced, argued, failed, tried again. Their presence filled the temple with warmth it hadn't held since the Massassi still lived. Their hope seeped into the cracks of the stone, softening edges that had been sharp for too long. Exar felt it. He hated it. But he also missed it. The innocence, the ignorance, the belief that the Force was a friend, not a weapon. Children carried that belief naturally. And children were easy to bend. Weeks turned into months. The Jedi Academy grew. New faces arrived, each one brighter, more open, more vulnerable than the last. Luke guided them with patience, teaching not the old Jedi code, but something gentler, something broken and rebuilt from ashes. Once, a student meditated too close to the chamber where Exar's presence lay strongest. Their mind brushed against him like a ripple across still water. He whispered, "Just a thought, barely a breath, a question shaped like a memory." The student shivered, opened their eyes, looked into the darkness, and Exar knew. They had felt him. Not fully, not clearly, but enough. The galaxy had forgotten his name, but these children would not. They were too open, too inexperienced, too trusting, and Luke, powerful though he was, could not watch all of them at once. Somewhere deep in the stone, Exar Kun opened his eyes again. Not in triumph, in hunger, not for blood, for opportunity. Because after 4,000 years of silence, the living had returned. The temple breathed again. And the spirit of the last great Sith Lord finally had something he had been denied for centuries. A way back into the world. A door, a mind, a beginning. It began with silence. Not a peaceful one, Not the kind found in deep meditation. This silence was cold, unnatural. It pressed against the walls of the great temple with a weight none of the students could explain. At first, no one noticed. The jungle world of Yavin 4 was known to be strange, loud at night, damp in the morning. The temple groaned in the wind. Animals cried in the dark. It was easy to dismiss the discomfort as nerves or the echoes of ancient stone shifting overhead. But something had changed. The force flowed differently in those halls now. It still answered the Jedi, but slower, more reluctant, as if it had to pass through something else before reaching them. And for the most sensitive students, it started to whisper. At night, while the others slept, they would hear faint voices just beneath the surface of their dreams, words they couldn't remember upon waking. Images of black stone, blood-red skies, and hands reaching from within the walls. A few dismissed them. Nightmares, they said, side effects of training. Luke's new Jedi were young, eager, emotionally raw. Dreams were expected. But others knew better. Tion was the first to question it. A historian by nature, she had spent hours in the lower levels, studying carvings left behind by the Massassi. She knew Yavin was ancient, but she hadn't expected to feel watched, followed, judged. She told Luke. He listened. He always did. But even he couldn't sense what they described. Not yet. Not clearly. So, the temple remained open, the training continued, new students arrived, and the whispers grew bolder. Gantoris was the first to speak openly. He was strong, willful, a natural leader among the trainees, but he began to isolate himself, training harder, meditating deeper, reaching for power none of the others could feel. He said he had a teacher. Not Luke. Someone older. Someone wiser. Someone who had lived through fire, and blood, and darkness. The others laughed at first. Gantoris had always been intense, but then his abilities began to grow. Fast. Too fast. He moved with precision that shouldn't have been possible. His understanding of ancient Sith tactics, things he had never been taught, became eerily accurate. Luke confronted him. Gantoris denied nothing. He said he was being prepared, that he would surpass them all, that the true master had returned. That night he walked into the forest. By morning he was gone. Only ash remained. The students were shaken. Whispers turned to fear. Luke deepened his meditations, reaching into the temple's heart. And this time he felt it. Not fully, but something, a shadow, ancient, cold, patient. It was not the dark side as he knew it, not the echo of Palpatine, not the wound left behind by Vader. This was older, hungrier, something rooted not in pain, but in pride. He began searching the archives. He reviewed the temple's history. And slowly, the name surfaced. Exar Kun. A Jedi, once. A Sith Lord, later. And not dead. Not entirely. Luke stood in the central chamber of the great temple that evening, watching the sunset filter through cracks in the stone. He felt the fear in his students, the uncertainty in the Force, and somewhere deep within the temple, the whispers smiled. It had taken centuries, but Exar Kun had spoken again. He didn't need armies anymore. Exar Kun had learned patience. The war had taught him that victory by strength alone would always invite resistance. The Jedi had crushed his empire with numbers and faith, but faith faded, and numbers could be turned one mind at a time. He waited in silence, reaching through the cracks in the Force like roots searching for water. Not all students were equal. Most were guarded. Many lacked the strength, but one was different. Qel-Droma. He was young, like the others, but there was something buried deep inside him that made Exar stop. Rage, grief, guilt, power, and loneliness. Qel wore it like a second skin, taken from his family, enslaved by the Empire, scarred by the cruelty of the spice mines of Kessel. He carried wounds that never healed. Luke had offered him a new life, a place among the Jedi. But Luke couldn't erase the past. Exar didn't want to. He only needed to remind Qel of it. At first, it was gentle. A voice during meditation, disguised as Qel's own thoughts. Memories resurfaced: his brother's screams, the coldness of Imperial boots, the endless silence of helplessness. The pain wasn't new. But now, it had direction. Now, it had meaning. Exar whispered strength. Not mercy. Not balance. He didn't call it the dark side. He called it power, justice, the ability to stop others from suffering as he had. The ability to take control. Qel listened. Then, he answered. He didn't tell Luke. He didn't tell anyone. He started spending hours alone in the temple's deeper halls, ones others found too cold to enter. He felt comfort there, belonging. His skills began to sharpen again, like Gantori's before him. But this time, it wasn't reckless. It was focused, disciplined, dangerous. Exar taught him how to reach into machines with his mind, how to touch thoughts without being noticed, how to suppress pain, how to channel anger through the Force without letting it consume him. Qel believed he was becoming something more than Jedi. He was right, and Exar knew it. He pushed harder. He showed Qel the ruins of Ossus not in body, but in dreams. He let him see what the Jedi had lost. Let him feel what Exar once felt, that the Jedi were not saviors, but hoarders. That their inaction caused more suffering than their enemies ever had. Qel began to ask questions. Luke answered as best he could. But the answers felt soft, hesitant, filled with regret. Exar's voice, by contrast, was never unsure. He spoke like someone who had walked through fire and chosen to keep burning. And Qel, angry, brilliant, alone, followed. He began building something. Secretly, using old schematics, stolen access codes, and fragments of technology Luke had kept hidden. A ship, a weapon, a path to vengeance. Not against the Jedi, but against those who had taken everything from him. The Empire may have fallen, but Qel believed its remnants still poisoned the galaxy. He would burn them out. Exar never forced him. He didn't have to. He only pointed to the wounds and offered a blade. By the time Luke noticed the shift, it was too late. Qel was no longer a student. He was a vessel. And Exar Kun had returned. Not in body, but in will. Not as a warrior. As a whisper behind the eyes of someone with nothing left to lose. Luke felt it the moment Qel disappeared. Not physically. Qel was still in the temple, still walking its halls, still training. But something inside him had shifted. A silence had formed around his presence. A silence Luke recognized from another life. The kind that surrounded his father. He followed the feeling through the temple corridors, letting the Force guide him. It led him downward past the classrooms, past the old meditation chambers, into the deeper levels carved by the Massassi long before the Republic even existed. These halls were dangerous. Not because of traps or beasts, because of memory. Luke stopped at the entrance to a long-forgotten chamber. The air was cold. The torches burned without flickering, as if the room itself refused to breathe. And there, standing in the center, was Kip. Eyes closed, hands shaking, as if fighting something no one else could see. "Kip," Luke said softly. The boy didn't turn. "Master," he whispered, but the voice wasn't his alone. There was an echo beneath it, older, sharper, colder. Luke took a step forward, and the chamber reacted. The temperature dropped. Shadows clung to the walls like living things. The force tightened around Luke's chest, not crushing him, but warning him. He had never felt anything like it. Not with Vader. Not with Sidious. Not even in the cave on Dagobah. This was deeper. Older. Luke closed his eyes and reached outward. "Kip, who's with you?" Silence. Then, "You should know my name." It didn't sound like speech. It sounded like stone cracking under pressure. Luke exhaled slowly, steadying himself. He did know the name. He had seen it in the archives, felt it in the Force, heard it whispered in the walls. Exar Kun. The shadows tightened. The torches dimmed. Kip opened his eyes, and they were glowing. "He teaches me," Kip said, voice trembling with a mix of pride and terror. "He shows me what you won't." Luke stepped closer. "Kip, he's using you." "No," Kip snapped. "He understands me." The air trembled. "He understands power," the voice said through Kip. "Through the walls, through the floor. Something your order has forgotten." Luke planted his feet. "You're dead," he said calmly. A long silence followed. Then the laugh came. Low, empty, ancient. "Death is for the weak." The shadows swirled, gathering behind Kip like a storm reaching for shape. Luke ignited his lightsaber, not to attack, but to defend, to give the room a point of light. The darkness recoiled, but only slightly. "Kip," Luke whispered, "fight him." "I can't," the boy said, tears starting to form. "He's in me. I didn't mean for it to happen." Luke reached out a hand. "You're not alone." The chamber exploded with Force energy. Kip screamed. The shadows convulsed. Luke staggered back as a spectral form tore itself from the stone, a shape without flesh, a face without eyes, a presence older than empires. Exar Kun. No body, no limits, only will. He hovered above the ground, the air around him vibrating like a drum. "You cannot fight me, Skywalker." Luke tightened his grip. "I don't want to fight." "Then you will lose." The temple shook. Dust rained from the ceiling. Kip collapsed, clutching his head as Exar's spirit towered above them both, pure hatred given form. Luke steadied himself and raised his saber. Not in anger, in resolve. Because now he finally understood. This was not a remnant of the Empire. Not a scar left by the Sith he knew. This was a shadow born when the galaxy was still young. And Luke was standing face to face with a darkness older than the Skywalker bloodline itself. The chamber shook as Exar Kun rose higher, his form bending the air around him like heat above a dying fire. The walls groaned. Dust drifted from ancient carvings. The ground trembled beneath Luke's feet. This was no simple ghost, no faint echo of a forgotten era. This was a will that had refused to break. A will that had refused to die. Luke stood his ground, lightsaber held low, open, showing peace, not aggression. He remembered what Yoda had taught him. what his father's fall had shown him. You cannot defeat darkness by becoming it. But Exar Kun was not a darkness born of fear or anger. He was a darkness born of certainty. You cannot stop me, the spectre said. His voice filled the entire chamber, cold, sharp, layered with centuries of hunger. I have killed worlds. I have broken Jedi. I have watched your order drown in its own failures. Luke did not flinch. You're alone, he said quietly. Exar's form rippled. It was not pain. It was irritation. Alone, he hissed. I have armies buried in stone, a legacy carved in blood. I have a student. Kip trembled on the floor, clutching his head. Exar's shadow stretched toward him, tendrils curling like smoke. Rise, Qel-Droma. You are the future. No, Luke said, stepping between them. His saber hummed softly. He's a child. Exar's voice sharpened. He is my vessel. Luke's heart tightened, not in fear, in recognition. He had seen this before on Cloud City, in the Emperor's throne room, in the silence that followed his father's last breath. Darkness always sought the broken, always whispered to the wounded, always promised power in exchange for pain. Luke extended his hand. Kip, he whispered, look at me. Kip lifted his head. Tears streaked his face. The darkness around him pulsed with each breath. I'm sorry, he said. I didn't mean. You're not him, Luke said gently. And you're not alone. The words shook something loose. Kip reached for Luke, and Exar struck. A wave of energy surged from the walls, slamming into Luke with the force of a collapsing starship. He was thrown across the chamber, hitting stone hard enough to crack it. His saber flew from his hand, extinguishing mid-air. Exar towered above him. Your father failed to end the darkness. You will fail too. Luke pushed himself up, breath shaking. His vision blurred. But the force flowed through him not as a weapon, but as a memory of every life he had saved. Every student who looked to him with hope instead of fear. He stood. No, Luke said softly. I won't. He closed his eyes and reached outward. Not to fight, to unite. The students above felt at first a pull, gentle and warm. Tyon, Streen, Cam Solusar, one by one, they stopped their training. They sensed Luke's call, his need, his plea. They answered. Their minds reached downward into the temple, joining Luke's presence with theirs, threads of light weaving together. A small unity at first, then stronger, then unbreakable. Exar recoiled. What are you doing? Luke opened his eyes, glowing faintly with the shared strength of his students. We're doing what you never could, he whispered. The chamber erupted in light. Not blinding, not violent. Pure. Warm. Alive. Exar Kun screamed not in fear, but in fury as the united presence of the young Jedi pushed against him. His form fractured at the edges. The tendrils withdrew. The stone around him vibrated violently. He reached for Kip once more. But the boy was already in Luke's arms. Exar Kun's silhouette wavered, thinning like smoke drawn into a vent. He clawed at the air, refusing to fade. I am eternal. Luke stepped forward. No, he said gently. You're over. And with a final surge, the Jedi's combined light enveloped the chamber, washing over the walls, the carvings, the stones that held Exar's essence. The scream faded. The shadow broke. And the spirit that had refused to die finally fell silent. Luke Skywalker did not fall. He froze. suspended in a moment of pure darkness, trapped between the world of the living and the echo of a Sith Lord who refused to die. His body lay motionless on the temple floor, eyes closed, breath shallow. Not dead, not alive. Caught. Around him, the students gathered. Young, afraid, uncertain. None of them were ready for this. None of them had been trained to face a spirit older than the Republic itself. But when they looked at Luke, their teacher, their guide, their hope-fear became something secondary, something smaller. Exar Kun emerged from the stone again, rising like smoke given purpose. His form wavered, pulled thin by centuries of imprisonment, but his presence was overwhelming. The chamber darkened. The walls trembled. "He is mine," the shadow whispered. "And you are children." Silence followed. Then Cam Solusar stepped forward. He had once touched the dark, once survived it, and he understood better than anyone how thin the barrier between fear and faith truly was. He knelt beside Luke, placing a steady hand on his shoulder. "He's not alone," Cam said quietly. Tyone joined him. Then Streen. Then the others. One by one, the students formed a circle around their unconscious teacher. No words passed between them. No instructions. Only the shared understanding that if they didn't stand now, they would lose more than Luke. They would lose themselves. Together, they closed their eyes. Reached inward. Reached outward. Reached toward each other. A faint glow rose from their joined presence, unsteady at first, flickering like a candle in a storm. Exar Kun sneered, drawing near, shadows stretching across the floor. "Light breaks," he said. But the circle did not move, did not bend, did not break. It only grew brighter. The light was not powerful. Not in the way Exar Kun had once been. Not like the ancient rituals or the dark side storms that had cracked mountains and cities alike. It was soft, gentle, a warmth drawn not from strength but from surrender, from unity. Each student gave what they could, a memory, a truth, a wound they had never spoken aloud. Tyone let go of her fear of failing the Jedi legacy. Streen offered the weight of years spent alone in silence. Cam opened the scars left by his past with the dark. None of it was perfect. But the Force didn't need perfection. Only honesty. Only trust. Exar Kun circled the room, his form contorting with impatience. His voice dropped like ice. "You cannot stop me. You are children playing at power." They didn't answer him. They only kept their eyes closed. The glow between them began to shift. It grew warmer, thicker, no longer flickering. It touched the walls, touched the carvings, touched Luke. He stirred. Barely. But it was enough. "He's returning," Exar Kun hissed. The shadow lashed out. He didn't strike with lightning or fire, he struck with memories. With pain, he whispered lies into their thoughts. Promised failure, isolation, death. They saw their fears unfold. Saw themselves breaking, saw the temple in ruins. But the circle held, not by resisting the fear, by letting it pass. Together they felt it, faced it, breathed through it. And the darkness found no purchase. The light grew again, slow, steady, alive. For the first time in 1,000 years, Exar Kun felt it pressing back against him. Not an attack, a refusal. Not power, hope. And it did not break. Exar Kun had ruled empires. He had broken Jedi masters, burned temples, commanded fleets with a single word. And now he screamed. The circle of light did not hurt him like a blade. It didn't burn like fire. It unraveled him silently, completely thread by thread. He reached for the old hatred, the memories of blood and victory, but they were slipping, dissolving. Tiani's voice was the first to rise. She didn't chant. She sang. A Jedi song, soft and forgotten, passed down from a time before the war, before Exar Kun, before all of it. The other students joined her, not in unison, not perfectly, but together. Their voices were flawed, but they were true, and Exar Kun couldn't stop them. The walls of the temple began to shift, not physically but spiritually. His sanctuary, his tomb, the heart of his immortality, it cracked. The shadows recoiled from the sound, from the harmony, from the shared will of those who refused to let him win. Luke stirred again. His eyes opened. Only for a moment. But that moment was enough. The force surged through the circle, not violently, but with clarity, with peace, and it poured into the echo that had once been a Sith Lord. Exar Kun thrashed, his form splintering. Not from pain, from memory. He saw the boy he once was, the apprentice, the seeker, the child who once believed he could master the Force without losing himself. But he had lost everything. And now, even the shadow of that loss was being erased. His scream was not rage. It was grief. Grief for who he could have been. Grief for who he never became. The light held steady, and Exar Kun fell apart. Not into ashes, but into silence. The light faded slowly. Not all at once, but like the last ember of a dying fire, soft, warm, complete. When the students opened their eyes, the air was still. The shadows were gone. The temple was quiet. Exar Kun was no longer there. No scream, no explosion, no final curse. Only silence. Luke inhaled, his first full breath since the spirit had taken hold. His hand twitched, his eyes cleared. Around him, the students lowered their heads, not in exhaustion, but reverence. They had not just survived. They had endured. Together, Qel-Droma stood apart, trembling. He had heard Exar's voice longer than the rest, had trusted him, believed him, helped him. But Luke met his eyes not with judgment, but with something heavier. Forgiveness. The kind that carries both love and truth. Kip nodded once, and the weight on his chest eased, if only a little. In the days that followed, the temple remained unchanged in stone, but something in the air had shifted. The darkness had not been destroyed, it had been faced, and that made all the difference. Some said Exar Kun was truly gone. Others weren't so sure. Luke never spoke of it directly. He didn't need to. He simply taught his students what Exar Kun had forgotten. That strength without compassion is not strength. That knowledge without humility is not wisdom. And that power, real power, is not what you take. It's what you protect. The legacy of Exar Kun lingered in the cracks of the temple, in the scars on Kip's soul, in the quiet warnings Luke passed on to the next generation. He was a ghost in more ways than one. But for now, he was gone. And the Jedi, however imperfect, remained. Learning, healing, remembering. Because even the deepest shadows begin as light.